Hello everyone, and welcome to another Paranormal M video. Please turn on notifications so you do not miss any new uploads, and leave a like if you enjoy the stories. Tonight's first story starts with some very vivid dreams and slowly turns into a series of strange experiences inside the storyteller's bedroom. What makes it even more unusual is that their mother also heard something that could not easily be explained. The experiences continued for several weeks before suddenly stopping. Thanks for being here, and now, let's begin. I hope you all have a relaxing night and sleep well afterward. I've gone back and forth on whether to call this an experience, an encounter, or simply something I still don't understand. The whole thing unfolded over roughly 10 weeks, although there were two strange incidents beforehand that may have been connected. I'll try to tell it as clearly as I can. It started with nearly 2 weeks of incredibly vivid dreams. These weren't ordinary nightmares. In some of them, I wasn't even myself. I had a different life, a different history, and memories that felt completely real. One dream affected me so deeply that I can still remember the grief I felt inside it. It was a kind of sorrow and horror I had never experienced in my waking life. The disturbing part was that I couldn't escape them. I would wake up, sit upright, check the time, drink water, and make absolutely sure I was awake. But the moment I closed my eyes again, the dream would continue from the exact point where it had stopped. It felt less like dreaming and more like being forced back into another life. Eventually, the dreams faded, and I began returning to something resembling a normal routine. Then, my mother and I heard the same thing. One evening, I went upstairs and told her I was going to take a shower. A few minutes later, while I was still in the bathroom, I heard a loud, muffled scream. At first, I assumed it had come from the television downstairs. My mother had been watching some kind of hospital program, so I thought perhaps there had been a dramatic scene. Then, my phone buzzed. My mother had texted, asking whether I was all right and whether I had just called for her. I told her I hadn't, but that I had heard the scream too. When I came downstairs, she explained that the voice had sounded exactly like mine. Not as though I had shouted from another room either. She said it sounded as though I had been sitting directly beside her, leaning close to her ear and screaming for help. She had almost jumped up and run to me. The only reason she hesitated was because she knew I was upstairs in the shower. That frightened both of us, but after a few days, life continued. Then, the main experience began. Even now, talking about it is difficult. For a long time, I couldn't describe it without crying or becoming convinced that speaking about it might somehow invite it back. The first night began normally. I had fallen asleep in my room, and sometime in the middle of the night, I woke with a feeling of terror so intense that it seemed to come from somewhere older than thought. It wasn't the ordinary sensation of being watched. It wasn't the nervous feeling that someone might be standing near the bed. The message inside that fear was immediate and unmistakable. Wake up now, or you are going to die. I shot upright, ready to run or defend myself, but the instant I moved, another feeling came over me. Dread. It was so heavy that I felt sick. My body wanted to shake, vomit, faint, and flee all at once, yet I remained almost perfectly still. It was as though some instinct inside me believed that even breathing too loudly would reveal where I was. The feeling wasn't spread throughout the room. It came from one precise location, the upper corner near the far wall. I couldn't see a figure there. There was no shadow shaped like a person and no face staring back at me. I couldn't describe what it looked like because it didn't seem to have a visible form. It was simply present, and I knew exactly where it was. Because of my health, my body doesn't handle prolonged stress well. Eventually, I began to crumple under the strain. I lowered myself back onto the bed and tried to behave as though I hadn't noticed anything. But once the first surge of adrenaline faded, I sensed something else coming from the corner. Amusement. I didn't hear laughter, nothing spoke. Still, I felt that it knew I was aware of it, and that my fear entertained it. I also had the strange impression that it was waiting, not necessarily for me, but for something else to happen. It felt as though it had arrived to complete some unknown task, and when the right moment came, something terrible would follow. Oddly, I didn't feel that it could simply reach out and hurt me. It didn't feel physically aggressive in that way, but I believed there would be consequences if I drew its full attention. At some point, I lost consciousness. I don't know whether I truly fainted or whether exhaustion forced me back to sleep. When morning came, the presence was still there. It was weaker, but it remained in the same corner. Every instinct in my body told me to get out. At the same time, I felt terrified of turning my back on it. I tried to convince myself that I was overtired and imagining things. Maybe it was the same effect that makes coats and furniture look like people in the dark. So, I rushed toward the bedroom door. The moment I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut, the pressure vanished. Instantly. The relief was so strong that my knees nearly gave out. It felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. I walked through the rest of the house, expecting the sensation to follow me. It didn't. Everything outside the bedroom felt completely ordinary. Later, I returned and opened the door. The presence dropped over me again before I had even crossed the threshold. It felt almost pleased that I had come back. For the rest of that day, it stayed confined to the corner. I could move around the room, but I never stopped feeling watched. That night, I managed to fall asleep. When I woke again, there was something new beside the bed. Have you ever walked through a dark room and instinctively known that a large object is directly in front of you, even before your eyes adjust? That was what I felt. It was as though a tall cabinet or heavy wardrobe had appeared beside me. The second presence felt solid, motionless, and strangely neutral. Then, a fraction of a second after I registered it, the dread from the corner returned. This became my routine for nearly 2 months. After the second night, the two presences almost always appeared together. Sometimes I would notice one a moment before the other, but neither seemed to remain alone for long. The presence beside the bed never felt hostile. It was simply there, like a silent guard or observer. The thing in the corner was different. It continued to radiate that awful amusement. Eventually, exhaustion became stronger than fear. I learned to sleep despite them, although I would wake repeatedly whenever another wave of dread moved through the room. Then came the final night. This time, I didn't wake because of an invisible warning. I woke because someone was visibly standing inside my bedroom. I sat up so quickly that my mind immediately began planning how to defend myself. I assumed someone had broken into the house. Near my desk, a small man was crouched down, reaching beneath it as though he were picking something up from the floor. He was shorter than me, and I'm only a little over 5 feet tall. The room was dimly lit by the streetlight outside my window. I couldn't clearly see his legs, but I could see his upper body and face. It was a human face. Not distorted, not monstrous, just completely unfamiliar. The corner presence was directly above him, and the neutral presence was beside my bed. All three were there at once. At first, I thought he was an intruder. Then I realized that a real person would have reacted when I suddenly sat upright. He didn't. He continued reaching beneath the desk as though I didn't exist. At the same time, I knew with absolute certainty that I should not let him realize I was awake. The thing in the corner had frightened me, but this figure felt capable of immediate physical violence. He didn't feel demonic or supernatural in the theatrical sense. He felt cruel, predatory. I stayed completely still. Then he stood and turned toward my bedroom door. My desk chair was blocking his path. For one absurd second, I remember thinking that if he was some kind of apparition, he would simply pass through it. He didn't. He looked down at the chair, adjusted his direction, and deliberately walked around it. That detail frightened me more than anything else. When he reached the doorway, he disappeared. At the exact same moment, both presences vanished too. The room became empty, and the nightly visits stopped. The presence in the corner seemed to return briefly once or twice afterward, but never with the same strength. I would sense it for a few seconds, almost as though it were checking whether I was still there, and then it would fade. Not long after that, our dog became ill. He began having severe seizures. The veterinarian said he seemed unusually young for the most obvious causes, and even they were surprised by how quickly his condition deteriorated. Within a short time, he stopped recognizing us. He became terrified of rooms he had known his entire life. Eventually, he suffered a seizure that lasted close to an hour, and we had to let him go. I still don't know whether his illness was connected, or whether the timing was simply cruel. My friends have offered different explanations. One believes the neutral presence came through a mirror that used to face my bed. She thought it behaved like a sentry, standing watch while something else took place. She also believed that living with chronic pain had made me unusually aware of my body and surroundings, allowing me to notice something I wasn't supposed to witness. After a very serious lecture from her, I moved the mirror. Another finger believes the events were directly connected to me. The place where the small man reached beneath the desk was where my dog used to hide during thunderstorms. She believes he may have taken something that had been protecting me, or perhaps something that belonged to me in a way I don't understand. I don't know what to believe. Maybe the dreams, the scream, the presences, the figure, and my dog's illness were unrelated events that my frightened mind connected afterward. But the consistency of those nights still troubles me. The presences appeared in the same places. They carried the same distinct feelings. They disappeared together on the night that figure walked out of my room. I'm not telling this story because I expect anyone to have a perfect explanation. I'm telling it because I want to understand what happened, and because I never want to experience anything like it again. During the pandemic, I was living in a tiny village in the Irish countryside called Walsh Moor. It was one of those quiet places surrounded by miles of dark bogland, open fields, and narrow roads that seemed to disappear into nowhere. Because of the restrictions, I barely left the village or its surrounding countryside for more than a year. Life became very still. The days blended together, and the nights felt longer than they probably were. I've always been a terrible sleeper, so sometime in the summer of 2021, I started going for walks late at night. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly why. Maybe I needed fresh air. Maybe I was restless. Or maybe there was something strangely appealing about the Irish countryside after dark. It had a different atmosphere at night. Familiar fields looked unfamiliar. Old trees became crooked silhouettes, and every distant sound seemed to travel for miles. One evening, sometime after 10, I left the village and followed one of the narrow country roads leading out toward the bog. I passed a few sheep fields, some sleeping cattle, and the occasional farmhouse with a light still glowing in a window. There were no street lamps, so I was using the flashlight on my phone to see where I was going. I had been walking for about 15 minutes when I heard it. A long, distant howl. I stopped immediately. There were plenty of dogs in the area. Almost every farm seemed to have one, and I was used to hearing them bark whenever someone passed nearby. But this didn't sound like an ordinary dog. It wasn't really a bark at all. It reminded me slightly of the scream of a fox, except it was much deeper, louder, and somehow heavier. The sound gave me the impression that whatever had made it was large. Much larger than a fox, at least. The closest comparison I can give is the howl from the film An American Werewolf in London. It had that same drawn-out, bellowing quality, somewhere between a shriek and a howl. I stood there for a few seconds, staring into the darkness, trying to work out which direction it had come from. Then I heard nothing. No barking afterward. No movement in the fields. Not even another howl. That silence somehow made it worse. I decided I had walked far enough for one night. I turned around and headed straight back toward the village, walking much faster than I had on the way out. Every rustle in the hedges made me glance over my shoulder, although I never saw anything following me. To this day, I still don't know what made that sound. The sensible explanation is that it was probably an unusual dog or a fox whose call had been distorted by the open landscape. Sound can travel strangely across bogland, especially at night. Still, Ireland has no shortage of old stories about strange creatures. There are legends of enormous phantom wolves, black dogs appearing on lonely roads, and even reports of large cats roaming through rural counties. I'm not saying that's what I heard. That explanation is definitely a stretch. But whatever made that howl sounded unlike any animal I had ever heard before. And I never went walking down that road alone at night again. Hey, I want to share a story about this old house my family has lived in for decades. It's been a roller coaster of eerie moments and strange sounds that just don't seem to want to go away. I promise it's not just your typical ghost story. There's something really unique about this place, and I want you to feel like you're right there with me. So, the house itself is over 100 years old, sitting quietly in a suburban area, but with a good stretch of space between it and the next neighbor. About 30 years ago, my parents bought this detached old home. Before they moved in, the house was pretty much forgotten, kind of derelict actually. The neighbors had some builders working nearby, and one day, those builders told the neighbors they'd seen an elderly man and woman walking arm in arm through the garden of our house. It was such a sweet sight. But here's the kicker. The neighbors quickly said no one had lived in that house for over 14 years. So, who did they see? The original owners were a couple with no children. The wife lived into her 50s, the husband made it into his 80s but passed away abroad. Not much is known about their personalities or reputations, which adds a bit of mystery. When my parents moved in with my two older brothers, strange things started happening. Nothing really scary or harmful, more like playful or cheeky. Objects would disappear and then pop up in the most bizarre places. Imagine looking for your keys and finding them inside the fridge. There were footsteps overhead when no one was up there. Doors would shut on their own, and sometimes you'd hear someone running up and down the stairs. It was subtle but persistent. One of the creepiest things was when I was alone in the house. It sounded like someone was dragging a piano from the attic. That heavy, scraping noise that would suddenly drop and then start again, louder each time. It was so unsettling that I had to leave the house just to catch my breath. My dad was the kind of guy who didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. But then, he started seeing an old man standing at the foot of his bed late at night. This man's face was covered with scars, the kind that come from severe acne. My mom is really into DNA and history stuff, and she found out the husband who lived in the house before had terrible acne scarring, which matched what my dad saw. These strange happenings continued until my mom and dad divorced. My dad stayed in the house and even extended it. After that, the noises and weird things gradually stopped until they were almost gone. Fast forward about 15 years, I'm now living in that same house with my two brothers and their families. The house is pretty big and open plan, so even with all of us, it doesn't feel crowded. About 4 months ago, I was home alone. My bedroom is downstairs, right opposite the stairs. Suddenly, I heard someone running up and down the stairs about 5 times. The last time, the footsteps stopped and never came back down. It was so clear and real, but everyone else was out of the country. No one was there but me. Since then, the whole family has been hearing the slamming doors, dragging sounds, and heavy footsteps again. During Christmas, my sister-in-law's brother stayed over. We didn't want to scare him with the story, so we kept quiet about the noises. But on the first night, he told us he heard dragging and loud footsteps above him, even though there's no upstairs where he was sleeping. The second night, he said someone was going up and down the stairs so much he actually got up to check if it was one of us. Right now, about 7 of us live in or around the house, and almost everyone has heard these weird, heavy sounds, guests included. I've heard thuds too, and honestly, I'm starting to believe there's something more than just creaky old floorboards. What puzzles me the most is why I don't hear the dragging noises as much as the others do, and why after so many years of silence, it's all started up again. Is this presence trying to tell us something? Is it bad, or maybe even good? I'm 25, live here with my brothers and dad plus their partners. The partners have definitely experienced some negative stuff, like dragging sounds and bolts locking on their own. My dad has had some experiences too, but me and one of my brothers who live here don't hear as much. It's strange, isn't it? This house feels alive in a way that's hard to explain. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind is just right, I swear I can almost hear footsteps that aren't ours. And maybe, just maybe, it's the old couple, still walking hand in hand through the garden, watching over us, playing their little tricks, reminding us they're still here in some way. So that's the story, or at least the parts I can put into words. It's a mix of mystery, family history, and a little bit of the unknown that keeps us on our toes. I don't know what the future holds for the house or for us, but I do know one thing. It's never really empty, and it never really sleeps. Hey there. I want to share some experiences that have been really weighing on me and a few others I've heard from recently. I hope by telling you it feels a little less heavy. So let's start with a story about moving into a new home. My partner, our dog, and I relocated across the country to this quaint old town, full of history but with a kind of dark past that we didn't fully know. We rented an old house, charming in many ways, but from the very first day, something about the basement just felt off. I'm not exaggerating when I say every time I look into that basement, my skin crawls. It's like this cold wave rushes over me, and my heart races, begging me to run or freeze. The dog, a usually brave and calm companion, started acting strangely. One evening, as he was staring into the basement, he suddenly urinated. Not the usual squat, but just this startled release, and then bolted upstairs, refusing to go back down for days. It was so unlike him. I've seen things too, shadows that are tall and imposing, almost human-shaped, moving just out of the corner of my eye. Doors slam on their own, and sometimes they creak open slowly, like the house is breathing. It's terrifying because it feels personal, like the basement holds some heavy presence. I started digging into the house's history, but this small town's records are tricky to find. The only thing I uncovered was a story about a police officer who passed away there back in the late 60s. To try and capture what's happening, I set up 2 cameras. one in the basement and one in the hallway leading there. Weirdly, every night around 4 a.m., the hallway camera catches these little orbs of light. I've read that these orbs might not be proof of anything supernatural, just dust or lens flare, but it still creeps me out when I see them. The previous tenants or owners apparently tried to cleanse the house with crosses made of sage oil above the windows and doors, everywhere except the basement. I've talked to spiritual folks who suggested using salt, sage, and blessings. I sprinkled salt around and was given some sage, but honestly, I'm too scared to use it myself. I don't feel brave enough to confront whatever is down there. I've reached out to a local church to see if someone could bless the house, and meanwhile, I try to stay positive upstairs with affirmations. Living here feels like walking a tightrope between fear and hope. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to tell you about a night with some friends that gave us all the creeps. We were 5 of us, college students, just hanging out. We decided to check out a playground near my house around 7 p.m., and then we thought, why not visit our old elementary school playground for a bit? After grabbing frozen yogurt, we parked at the back of the school, something I didn't even know was possible, and reminisced about running around the fields as kids. As the sun dipped lower, I suggested we skip the nature walk near the school because it was getting dark. Everyone agreed, and we made our way from the back to the front of the school. At the playground, 2 people were on the swings but left shortly after, replaced by 2 girls and their mom. One of the girls was the sister of an old friend. We stayed for about 20 more minutes, just talking and laughing, even though we knew maybe we shouldn't be there anymore. Then, as we headed to the car, chatting about some kind of inappropriate topic, I suddenly felt this chill run down my spine, like something was watching us. Ignoring it at first, we continued, but then a strange light flickered in the corner of my eye. I stopped everyone and asked, "Did you just see that?" Right then, we heard a door swing open somewhere nearby, and without a word, we all sprinted to the car. Doors locked, engine roaring, and as we drove away, we all just sat in stunned silence, wondering what the heck just happened. The school was deserted, parking was limited, and nobody else was around. That eerie vibe stayed with us for days. Lastly, I want to share a story from someone who worked at a Victorian manor turned into a kind of castle hotel called Larnack's Castle. This person was a dinner host, entertaining guests in an old dining room that seated only 14 people. When more guests came, they'd extend the table into an adjacent room called the music room. This music room was something else. Even in daylight, it felt heavy, oppressive. Tall windows never quite let the sun in. The fire never warmed the air properly, and the creaks and rattles of the old manor added to the eerie atmosphere. Guests loved the room when filled with laughter and music, especially when someone played the old piano. But empty, it felt like the walls themselves were watching. Sometimes tourists would hesitate to enter, standing outside, peering in, saying they didn't want to go inside or offering no explanation at all. The host, though generally unafraid of the manor's creaks and groans, felt a deep unease when tasked with opening the curtains in the music room. They even avoided looking at their reflection in the windows. On some nights, shadows flickered in the corner of the eye, lights turned on and off on their own, and a sense of cold settled in. One night, after all the guests had left, the host was alone except for one other staff member. While moving chairs from the music room to storage, they noticed the tablecloth had been folded over in a way they didn't remember doing. Suddenly, a crushing weight pinned the host near the table, a coldness that forced them closer and closer. Panicking, they yelled, "Get off!" and managed to break free, retreating to the kitchen where the other staff member agreed it was time to leave immediately. Leaving the manor that night, they noticed a light in the parlor at the top of the castle flickering on and off, and a shadowy figure moving in the window. The host quit soon after, unable to shake the feeling of dread. Years later, when revisiting, they played a few chords on the piano, and it felt strangely right. But that awful weight and the memory of that night stayed with them forever. They just can't bring themselves to enter that room again. So those are some stories, from basements that feel alive with shadows, to playgrounds that suddenly seem haunted by unseen things, to a grand old manor where music and mystery intertwine in unsettling ways. If any of this resonates with you or you've got advice, I'd be so grateful to hear it. Sometimes just sharing helps make the fear a little less lonely. Hey there, I want to share a story with you that's been on my mind lately. It's a bit unusual, and I'm not typically someone who believes in paranormal stuff. But after some strange things I've experienced, things that felt too coincidental to ignore, I've started to wonder if maybe there's more going on than meets the eye. Before I dive into this tale, just know I've had a couple of odd experiences with living things close to me, like my childhood dog and an ex, that happened right before big life changes or medical emergencies. I won't go into those now unless you want to hear about them, but I mention it to set the stage. Someone once told me I might be clairsentient, but honestly, I'm not sure what to make of that. Anyway, this story is separate, but it really shook me. So here's the background. My partner, let's call him Luke, and I'm 25, he's 26, have been thinking about buying his grandmother's house. She's 91, deeply religious, and unfortunately in a nursing home now due to dementia. This house has been in the family for 70 years, and she's lived there alone for about 50 years after her husband passed away, though we don't know much about how or where he died. She never remarried or dated after that. The house itself is like stepping back in time. Everything feels frozen in the 1950s. The wallpaper, the carpets, the windows, even the doors. It's all original. The family is giving Luke the first chance to buy it before it goes on the market. Last Saturday night, Luke and I finally had some free time to visit the house together. It was the only moment we both could make it happen, and the family gave him a week to decide if he wants to buy. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed a light was on in the living room. At first, we thought maybe someone was inside, but it was just a lamp left on, apparently to make it look like someone's home. Inside, Luke mentioned that some things had been moved around, like posters that were once in his grandmother's bedroom were now in the living room, which struck him as odd. But since family members have access and a health worker comes by for paperwork, we figured that explained it. I'd been in this house before, visiting his grandmother, and it always felt normal, nothing eerie. But this time, the moment I stepped inside, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt before. It was like that sudden fight or flight reaction, making me want to get out fast. But I stayed. We walked through the rooms, and honestly, the house needs a ton of work. The last room we checked was his grandmother's bedroom. Luke noted that the only dresser in there might have belonged to his grandfather, and that we probably wouldn't keep it. As we were leaving that room to head down the stairs, there's this small side table right inside the bedroom entrance. I don't know if Luke accidentally bumped it, but suddenly a picture fell off it and landed with a soft thud on the floor. I was still inside the room when it happened, and I half joked that it was some kind of ominous sign. After all, I'm not thrilled about the amount of work the house needs compared to the price. Luke knelt down to pick up the picture, and when he looked at it, it was an old, vintage-style trifold frame depicting Mary holding baby Jesus. Now, I'm not religious at all, and I don't know much about biblical symbols, but something about that moment, the way I felt when we first walked in, the sudden dropping of that picture, made me deeply uneasy. It was as if the house itself was trying to communicate something I couldn't quite understand. We didn't stay much longer after that. The air felt heavier, and every creak in the old floorboards sounded louder. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like we weren't alone, even though it was just the two of us. When we finally stepped outside, The cool night air was a relief. Luke and I both were quiet on the drive back, each lost in our own thoughts about what we'd just experienced. I'm still wrestling with what to do about the house. On one hand, it's a chance to keep a family home alive. On the other, there's this unsettling energy that I can't shake. I keep wondering if that feeling was real or just my imagination running wild. But one thing's certain, the house isn't just old. It feels like it's holding on to memories, maybe even something more. And I'm not sure if we're ready to live with that. Hey, I want to share with you two strange experiences that have really stuck with me over the years. They're a little eerie, a little baffling, but I hope you'll feel like you're right there with me, hearing every detail as it happened. All right, the first story takes us back about 10 years. I was 19 then, just a couple of years into living on my own for college. To give you a little background, after I moved out at 17, my dad sadly passed away a year later. That hit my mom hard. She was really down, and so my older sister and I decided to move back in with her to keep her company and help out however we could. One weekend, my mom went on a trip with my aunts, so it was just me and my sister at the house. Now, ever since I was a kid, I never liked my parents' bedroom. It just had this weird vibe that I couldn't put my finger on. But on this night, I decided to sleep in my mom's room because, well, they had a TV there, and I wanted to watch some movies before bed. So, I'm lying there, the room dimly lit by the flickering TV screen, and the bathroom door is right opposite the bedroom door where I'm sleeping. I must have dozed off watching some late-night show. Then, in the early hours, around 4 or 5 a.m., I woke up suddenly. There, standing in the hallway, right between the bathroom and bedroom doors, was this tall, dark figure. For a moment, I thought it was my sister because she's very tall and is a sleepwalker. So I called out her name, but instead of answering, the figure suddenly sprang forward and jumped on me. It pinned me down, and in that moment, I really thought it was a real person, like a burglar or something. It was on top of me, holding one of my arms up, and with the other arm, it covered my mouth, pressing its elbow into my arm to hold me still. All I could see were these big, beautiful blue eyes glowing in the dark. The rest of its face was just nothing, just darkness. I struggled, and for a brief second, I managed to free my mouth enough to scream as loud as I could. That's when my sister woke up and ran into the room. The figure, or whatever it was, jumped off me and rushed past her through the door. I yelled at my sister to catch it, to run and shut the back door of the house. But she just stood there, confused. She kept saying, "What? Where? There's no one here. You're dreaming. Wake up." Right then, our neighbor came to the gate, asking for my mom because he'd been woken up by my scream. I was terrified, shaking, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or awake. Nobody else saw the figure, just me. The only proof I had was this purple bruise on my arm from where it had held me down. My sister's version of the story is a little different. She says when she got to the room, I was just lying there, staring up at the ceiling. But my memory is clearer. I remember sitting up in bed, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Okay, now on to the second story, which is less terrifying but just as strange. It feels almost like a ghost, or maybe some prankster, is messing with me, and honestly, it's starting to feel a bit comical. A few years back, I noticed my mom's wedding rings had gone missing. We tore the house apart looking for them and found some empty jewelry boxes tucked away in the guest room closet, which was odd. Eventually, I gave up, thinking maybe the cleaning lady had taken them or they were just lost. Then, about a year later, I went out to dinner and brought a small jewelry box with me to put on some earrings. I wore the earrings, came home, and found the missing wedding rings placed inside that tiny box. That was weird enough, right? Like, how did they get back there? After that, things were quiet until recently. I was staging the house to sell, so I moved all my office stuff, keyboard, mouse, all of it, into the garage. When I started setting up my new office, my mouse was missing. I searched everywhere, unpacked every box, but couldn't find it. Weeks passed and I finally gave up, bought a new one. Then one day, I stopped at the car wash, cleaned and vacuumed my car until it was spotless. The leather seats scrubbed just right. You know how thorough I get. I parked the car in my locked garage and went inside to relax and watch some TV before bed. The next morning, I left to grab breakfast, and when I came back, the missing mouse was sitting right there, smack dab in the middle of the car seat, in my locked garage. Like, what? And just last week, I was working alone at home all day. I stepped out for a couple of hours. When I returned, I found several kitchen drawers wide open, empty drawers, but nothing was missing. Not even from the drawer right next to them where I keep cash and credit cards. Why would a ghost steal a stupid Apple mouse and then return it 3 months later? And why would a person even do that? I've since changed all the locks, reset every code, and set up cameras like I'm preparing for a heist investigation. Whether it's a human or some non-human entity, I guess only time will tell. So, that's my story. 2 weird encounters that I can't explain. One terrifying and one just plain odd. Thanks for listening. Maybe you've had something strange happen too? Hey there. Come sit with me for a bit. I've got some stories to share. Real ones. The kind that send a chill down your spine, but also make you wonder about the world beyond what we can see. Let me start with a time about 2 or 3 years back when I was working in a hospital's women's wing. It was a new part of the hospital, built onto the old main building, and it was kind of isolated. To grab snacks or drinks, you actually had to leave this new wing and walk into the main hospital building. By then, I'd had my fair share of strange experiences, but this place had its own eerie vibe. See, the older part of the hospital, I'm not too familiar with that area, but I do remember walking past some exam rooms. Each room had a tiny changing area inside. One day, as I passed by one of these rooms, I glanced in and saw something that froze me in place. It was like a person wrapped in bandages, crawling out of the fitting room, moving just like that girl from that horror movie, The Ring. I blinked, and it was gone. But man, my heart was racing for a while after that. Then, in the new hospital wing, getting your snacks was a trip up 3 whole flights of stairs. The front of the building was nothing but glass, so you could see your own reflection as you climbed. I remember looking at myself and joking aloud, "Hey, I'm just here for some snacks. I don't mean to disturb anyone, but please don't follow me. I only want some snacks." It was a silly thing to say, but suddenly, when I looked back at the glass, I saw a tall, black shadow behind me. I spun around fast, but the stairs were empty. When I looked back at the glass, it was just me again. That shadow hadn't been there a second ago. A few months later, I quit that job. Even now, when I hear other people's hospital stories, I think back to those moments. Another time, during the day, I was taking out the trash and saw this black shadow, like the shape a cloud makes when it briefly blocks the sun. But this shadow was the size of a grocery cart, just lingering behind a parked car. Seconds later, nurses came out carrying a body and loaded it into an ambulance. I swear, I'll never work near a hospital again. No way. All right, shifting gears a little. After high school, I landed a job at the local strip mall at a store called Kohl's. There was this girl, Juanita. Yeah, my high school crush. I kept thinking I saw her everywhere, walking in or out of the store. I'd say, "Hey, that's Juanita." But whenever I went to find her, she was never there, always hidden behind crowds or just gone. It happened so often that I started to wonder if something was up. One day, I told a girl I'd gone to school with about seeing Juanita. She smiled at me in a way that made me feel a little crazy, and then she said something that hit me like a brick. Juanita had died in a car crash on her way to school years ago. We had a fight back then because Juanita was leaving for her old school, and I'd been upset, storming off and not speaking to her again. She died back in 2004. I found out where she was buried around 2014 or 2015. When I got to the cemetery, this huge place, I had only a picture of her headstone. I got out of my car and said, "Hey guys, I don't mean to disturb you, but I'm looking for my sweetheart. Can you help me find her?" It felt respectful, talking to them like they were still there in some way, not trying to cause harm. Then, my eyes locked on a headstone, and I knew it was hers. I found a Bible workbook she'd given me, with her handwriting inside. I'd only done one section years ago, and I'd lost all her letters and some photos. I cried there, telling her I loved her. After that, I never saw her again. It's almost 2023 now, and I haven't gone back. I don't know if this was paranormal or what, but everyone thinks I'm nuts when I share the story. Now, about a dream I had recently. It was the night before Samhain, which is this time when the veil between worlds is thin. I've had unusual dreams before, but this one was different. Most of it was just everyday stuff at home, nothing remarkable. But throughout the dream, there was this spirit hanging around me. It spooked me sometimes, because it'd just quietly stand there, and when I'd turn and suddenly see it right beside me, I'd jump. But it didn't feel hostile at all. When I looked at it, it just looked back, calm and peaceful, maybe a little lonely. The spirit was tall and lanky, like a shadow with a broken skull floating where its face should be, and a glowing red heart in its chest. It was unlike any spirit I'd worked with before. I do work with nature spirits and other beings, but this one was different. A friend suggested I look into Santa Muerte and Dia de los Muertos, especially since I'd recently visited Mexico. It was curious that this dream happened right before Samhain and Dia de los Muertos. I'm still trying to figure out if it was a lost soul or something else, and what I could do to help it. Let me tell you about something that happened when I was about 14 or 15. My brother and I were really close, spending a lot of time together. He liked playing with fire in the backyard, just small stuff with paper, nothing dangerous. One night, we were in our bedroom, and he started playing with his lighter. Suddenly he yells, "Hey, check this out!" The flame on his lighter began to liquefy, running down his hands like melted glass, but still burning. It would vanish just before hitting the carpet, luckily. Every time he lit the lighter, the same thing happened. I was amazed but also scared and declined to try it myself. After a few minutes of this liquid fire show, the whole house lost power. I thought it was a coincidence, but maybe not. I asked my brother to light the lighter again, but it wouldn't work. Then, a dark orb appeared, floating above our bed in the pitch-black room. It was darker than the darkness itself. I asked if he saw it, and he shouted, "Yes!" The orb began bouncing up and down on the bed, like it was playing. Then it started bouncing in a triangle: bed, wall, an old big TV, then back to bed. When it hit the TV, it made that weird boing noise those old TVs make. The orb sped up, bouncing faster and faster until it hit the TV one last time and disappeared through it. At that exact moment, a vase in my mom's room shattered. Mom and my sister screamed. Then the lights came back on. My brother and I looked at each other, bewildered. We cleaned up the broken vase, but never told anyone. It would have scared them. That orb never showed up again, but my brother kept experiencing strange things wherever he moved after that. Here's another story from when I was 14. I'd often walk around town at night, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. We were supposed to be home by 9. Our neighborhood wasn't the safest. There were sketchy people around, so I never took the same route home twice. One night, I was passing an old, creepy building that used to be a hotel. My phone rang from an unknown number. My friends and I often prank called each other, so I answered. The voice was deep, nothing like any of my friends could do. It was creepy, whispering things like, "I'm right behind you. I'm watching you." I looked around, but no one was there. The street was open, cars parked as usual, no hiding spots. I hung up, thinking it was a friend messing around. Then my phone rang again, same creepy voice, but this time, laughing. I hung up again, annoyed. Then, my phone rang a third time, but I didn't hear my ringtone. Instead, the sound was coming from a bush beside me. A tiny bush, no place for someone to hide. I recognized my unique ringtone. I ran home as fast as I could and told my friends, but none owned up. Thinking back, with my varied routes and times home, no one could have planned this. I still get chills driving past that building. Let me take you back about 30 years, to when I was the youngest of 5 siblings. From a young age, I saw things, shadows, figures just at the edge of my vision. But I was never afraid, more like comforted, as if watched over. We lived in a small 3-bedroom apartment, and being the youngest, I wasn't allowed in my siblings' rooms. So, at about 7 years old, I slept on the living room sofa. The furniture was arranged so the sofa lined up with the bathroom door, connected by a hallway that was lit enough to serve as a nightlight. One night, it was just me, my mom, and her friend. My brother and sister weren't home. Mom and her friend were in her bedroom, and I was on the sofa. As I drifted off, I heard a voice calling my name, a woman's voice. At first, I ignored it, but after a few times, my stomach fluttered with nerves. I looked around the living room, nothing. Then I realized the voice was coming from the bathroom. In the doorway stood a lady dressed all in white, faceless, but surrounded by a bright golden light. Her dress moved gently, like a breeze was blowing through it. She floated there, arms reaching out, calling my name softly and kindly. I was terrified and screamed. By the time my mom came running, the lady had vanished. I never saw her again, but sometimes, still, I hear my name in that soft voice. Now, here's a wild one from about 10 years ago. I rented a room from my aunt, who lived alone with several German Shepherd dogs. She used to be a professional breeder. We got along great. She's Wiccan, and I'm fascinated by the occult. When I was 20, I stayed in the spare bedroom, right under my aunt's room. She'd crate some of her dogs upstairs before going out. One day, as I was unpacking, I heard a low growling from the dog upstairs. She was staring at the door, growling in a way I'd never seen before. When I came near, she calmed down, but then she started again, growling and later barking. I checked the house for intruders. Nothing. Then, I thought I heard 2 men talking faintly upstairs. The voices faded when I got close. The dog's father, usually loud, was silently staring at the loft area too. The voices came back, and then, right from my open doorway a few feet away, I heard a child say, "Hello?" I jumped up, grabbed my firearm, and cleared the house like a one-man SWAT team. No one was there. The dog sat close to me while I waited for my aunt. She came home and was furious the dog had gotten out. She told me she'd been experiencing similar things for months when she was alone. She warned me to always check when I hear knocking before inviting anyone in. Something had tried to trick her before. I think she might have unknowingly brought something into her house. That experience really showed me how strange the world around us can be. I've had other experiences, but this one sticks with me. Thanks for listening. I'll share more stories soon, but for now, remember to watch the shadows and listen to the whispers. They might just be trying to tell you something.
Hey
Hey there, I want to share with you a series of experiences, some strange, some downright eerie, that have stuck with me and others over the years. These stories aren't just tales, they're moments where the veil between the normal and the paranormal feels thin, and sometimes downright terrifying. Let's start with a cat named Ollie, or to be more precise, Oliver. I used to date this woman who had a cat that looked just like Garfield. You know, that orange tabby with the goofy grin. Whenever I visited her place, Oliver became mine, in a way. He'd insist on sleeping wherever I did, weaving around my legs, curling up by my side. He was shadowed to me, and honestly, I never fully understood why he was so attached, but it was like he knew something special about me, or maybe just liked the attention. I took care of him whenever I was over, feeding him, playing with him, and he'd purr with this warmth that melted any chill in the air. Sadly, Oliver developed a serious health issue, urinary crystals that built up too much. It was heartbreaking when she had to put him down. That loss lingered with me. Fast forward a year or so, I was living near the TCU campus in Fort Worth, Texas. There was this one old house on my way home that always gave me the creeps, especially late at night when it was empty. It felt like something inside was watching me, an unseen presence keeping its gaze fixed on me. But strangely, when people rented it, I never felt that eye on me at all. One night, some frat guys I knew left their doors unlocked and went out to the bars. Someone broke in that same night, and the next day, they moved out. Later, one of the guys asked me to swing by the house at night to find a laptop charger they thought they left behind. I thought, why not? But walking in there was a big mistake. The layout was odd. There was a hallway leading from the bedrooms to the kitchen, but before you got to the kitchen, there was this little entryway into the living room where French doors used to stand. As I walked down the hall toward the kitchen, I suddenly felt something brush against my leg. I looked down to see a smoky white cat winding around me, almost like a ghostly version of Oliver himself. The cat began to fade as it circled my leg, but there was this aura of pure warmth and love radiating from it. It felt like a warning, a presence from my lost friend. The moment the cat disappeared, a cold, heavy evil settled in the living room. I turned toward it and saw two glowing red eyes staring back. The hatred was palpable, like it wanted me gone, maybe worse. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the whole house could hear it. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of there faster than I thought possible. And guess what? The laptop charger wasn't even there. So I went through all that just for a scare and no charger. Classic. Now, shifting gears, let me tell you about another experience I had when I was a teenager, around 14 or 15. I was deep into playing GTA Online on my Xbox 360 late at night. Suddenly, my internet cut out. No big deal, I thought. I'll just wait and text my friends to see what's up. But then, I noticed something strange. My phone was frozen on the time, 1:47 a.m. No matter what I did, I couldn't get it off that screen. It was like the entire world was stuck. Then, the TV and every sound in the house stopped too. Except for me. I was the only one making noise. I got uneasy and decided to check on my stepdad, who was sleeping on the couch. Usually he snores like a freight train, but now, not a breath, not a sound. I kept poking him, whispering for him to wake up. But nothing. In the kitchen, a single light flickered on and off, like it was alive. Everything else was silent and still. I felt a deep chill settle over me. Despite the fear gnawing at my gut, I stepped outside to see if the weirdness extended beyond the house. But everything was frozen. Cars, animals, even insects hung motionless in the air. I was alone, moving through a world paused in time. Looking up, the sky was alive with stars, more than I'd ever seen before. Then, one star started moving, growing larger and larger, closing in on me. No sound, just this overwhelming presence. Panic surged through me, screaming, "Run!" I dashed back inside, my heart hammering. In my room, I tried to turn off a light, but it stubbornly stayed lit. Then, a sudden noise like a generator kicked on and everything snapped back to normal. My phone unfroze, and I called my best friend, asking how long I'd been gone. He said only a few minutes had passed. Still shaken, I got a knock on my door. My stepdad came in, looking concerned. He said he'd had a strange dream where I was trying to wake him up, poking him awake. I told him I hadn't done that, but I was terrified and couldn't make sense of it. That night, sleep was impossible. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of that frozen world. And then, there's the story from when I was just a kid, about the demon, or maybe something else, that I met. I was about 7, and my older sister, who was 13, got off the school bus before me. She went inside our house and slammed the door shut, locking me out. I was stuck on the porch swing, crying and frustrated, trying to finish my homework. We lived in a small town where people didn't lock doors during the day, so being locked out felt strange. While sitting there, a boy about my age with curly black hair came up and sat beside me on the swing. What struck me was the white feathered wings on his back. At the time, our house was known for being haunted by relatives, so seeing a winged figure didn't feel completely out of place. He introduced himself as Valen, though later I learned it was Valak, and we talked about our days and pets. He even mentioned a pet named Dragon. When he asked if I wanted to meet Dragon, I told him I needed to ask my mom. Right then, my mom's car pulled into the driveway. I told her about my sister locking me out and asked if I could go meet my new friend's pet. She glanced over the porch but didn't see Valak, just me, and gave a cautious yes with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As she unlocked the door, I whispered to her that I thought Valak might be a guardian angel because of his wings and the timing of his appearance. Her face turned pale, and once inside, she practically threw me in and slammed the door shut. Then, she found a bottle of holy water and doused me with it. I was confused and hurt. She never really explained why, but I wasn't allowed outside alone for weeks after. Years later, as a teenager, I stumbled upon a demonology book with a section on demons starting with V. When I saw Valak's name, the description, a childlike demon with angel wings who rides a two-headed dragon, sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, that childhood encounter made more sense, though it left me with more questions than answers. My mom, who was deeply into Christian theology, probably recognized the name and feared for my safety that day. On a different note, I've noticed something odd with a spirit I've lived with for years, a friendly ghost attached to a teddy bear I've had since forever. This spirit won't touch anything new. For example, he used to mess with the old light switches and flip songs on my old MP3 player when I was upset, but after I got an iPod, he stopped. He still plays with my record player though, which is newer but maybe feels familiar. He knocks landline phones off their cradles but never touches cell phones, and he'll topple old books from the shelf, especially hardbacks, but never new ones. It's like he respects the unfamiliar, or maybe he's just wary of things that don't belong to his era. Has anyone else experienced spirits avoiding new objects? Lastly, a story from my grandfather, a man of science and a retired test pilot. He lived in a small cottage in a vineyard, with one room upstairs and one downstairs, no internal stairs, just outside entrances. One night, he decided to sleep there and got woken by footsteps above him. Thinking someone had broken in, he reached for his pistol. Suddenly, loud, unsettling laughter filled the room, like a witch's cackle from a horror movie, echoing above. He was frozen in fear, hand on his gun, for what felt like hours. The laughter never stopped. He told me the only relief was when the rooster crowed at dawn, or maybe when the sun started to rise. After that night, he never stayed there past sundown again. So there you have it. These are some of the moments where the unseen brushed close, where warmth and terror mingled in the shadows. I hope these stories resonate with you, maybe spark some curiosity or shared experiences. If you want, I can share more, because sometimes the stories we tell keep the unknown a little less lonely. Thanks for listening. Hey there. I just wanted to share something that's been happening to me and my mom in our apartment. I'm Mia. I'm 22 now, and my mom's 54. We've always been kind of open to the spirit world. I mean, I've felt this kind of energy since I was a kid. It's not scary or evil, but it's not warm and comforting either. It's something in between, something that feels like it's been with us forever. Yet it's not my dad or anyone I knew. It's definitely there, like it's following us around. I've got loads of stories, but I'll start with the ones happening right now. If you like what you hear, I've got plenty more to tell. So a few days ago, I made a post about some spooky stuff going on in our apartment, and some people seemed interested, so here I am with another story. This one's mostly about my mom, actually, but I'm involved too. Alright, so you've probably heard about the little things. Weird noises, footsteps, things moving. But some of the bigger, creepier moments really stick out. Like the mist. My mom was asleep one night in her bedroom, which is at the far end of the apartment. She's had this thing since she was a kid, where she wakes up every night around 3 a.m., just like clockwork. One night, she woke up and froze because there was this big cloud of mist in the room. She said it was almost like a ball of fog, just hovering there. She stared at it for what felt like 2 whole minutes, blinking, fully awake, but it never disappeared. It just stayed there, silent and still. We have no idea what it was, and luckily, it hasn't come back since. Then there's what we call the "I'm home" events. This one's really weird and happens a lot. I'll be in the apartment and suddenly hear the front door open, keys jingling, footsteps, and sometimes even the sound of someone sitting down on the couch. It's happened 3 times just in the last few hours. The first time it happened, it was so loud it freaked me out so much I grabbed a baseball bat and called out for my mom. But when I opened my bedroom door to check, nothing was there. Total silence. It's like someone was here a moment ago and then vanished. My mom's heard me come in before, and we've even faintly heard each other's voices when no one else was around. It's unsettling, but strangely common for us. Now, let me take you back to when we first moved in. At first, the noises and movements were small and random, but over time, they became more frequent. Because of that, Mom and I decided to try something called automatic writing. I'm not sure if I'm doing it perfectly, but here's how it works. I sit quietly with a notebook and pen. Mom sits nearby, and she asks questions. Names, yes or no questions, things like that. I clear my mind, focus on white light to protect myself, and just write whatever comes through. Usually, it's a bunch of scribbles and random answers, but one name kept coming up. Edwin. Now here's the thing. Mom never told me this before, but when she was younger, she used to play with a Ouija board quite often. And guess what name she kept getting? Edwin. When she saw me write it down, she went pale. She'd never mentioned it to me, and there was no way I could have known this name. It was chilling. That night, Mom had a strange dream. She described it as feeling like she wasn't really asleep, but couldn't wake up either. In the dream, she saw a man, but she couldn't remember his face clearly. That was all she could tell me. Then, a couple of nights later, I was about to fall asleep when I suddenly felt this strong urge to draw. It was like something was shouting at me inside my head. I grabbed a pencil and a sketchbook beside my bed and sketched a man's face. Now, I love art, but drawing faces? Not my thing at all. The next morning, when I showed my mom the drawing, she instantly recognized it as the man from her dream. I swear I couldn't have made that up. Things went on like this for a while, nothing really changing much. We thought maybe Edwin was okay with being seen, and that's why things didn't get worse. But then, another presence started to make itself known, a female one. It was like she felt ignored because we were focused on Edwin. We tried to understand her, and one name came through: Edwina. At that point, we were really confused. Was it two different spirits with similar names? Was it one spirit with two sides? Or maybe one was copying the other? Nothing was clear. The activity kept going, neither getting stronger or weaker after we acknowledged Edwina. Even now, as I'm writing this, my stereo just turned on, played a few notes, and then shut off all by itself. It's like they're still around, reminding us they're here. I really appreciate everyone's advice and support, but Mom and I have learned to live with these spirits. We're okay with Edwin and Edwina, but there are others I could tell you about too. I've got stories from another house I lived in that was even more active. If anyone wants to hear more, I'd be happy to share. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to tell you about this experience that's been on my mind for years now. Something that really stuck with me and even made me join Reddit just to share it with folks who might understand. So picture this. I was around 16 and my best friend, let's call her Mia, and I were inseparable, like most teens with their closest friends. Mia's home life was pretty rough. Her mom would often spend nights out drinking or at men's places, barely coming home. Because of that, Mia and I would usually stay over at her house to look after her little sister Lily, who was about 6. Now, one thing I always found strange when I first started spending nights there, Mia and little Lily shared a bedroom. Even though they had an extra room in the house where they could have had their own spaces, they always stuck together. I didn't think much of it back then, just shrugged it off. But that night was different. I was asleep in Mia and Lily's room, snuggled up in Mia's bed, with Lily nearby. Mia had chosen to sleep in their mom's bed that night, probably to keep an eye on things. Suddenly, I feel a gentle shake on my arm, and Lily's whisper cuts through the quiet. "Mom needs to talk to you. She's downstairs." Half asleep and confused, I get up and follow Lily out of the room. She scampers ahead, but by the time I reach the corner near the stairs, she's vanished. I'm standing there, heart thumping, and I make my way down into the living room. It's pitch dark and completely empty. No sign of Lily or Mia's mom. I check the kitchen, still nothing, and my confusion deepens. I head back upstairs, peek into Mia's room, where she's still out cold, and then go to Lily's bed. That's when panic floods me. Her lips are a strange blue, and she's not breathing. I shake her gently but urgently, calling out to Mia. At that moment, Mia rushes in, just in time to see Lily take a deep, desperate breath. Color floods back into her cheeks, and she stirs, settling back into a peaceful sleep. I'm absolutely shaken, telling Mia what just happened, that Lily woke me, led me downstairs, then disappeared, and I found her not breathing in bed. Mia's reply? Calm but heavy. "Yeah, that's why I sleep close to her. She stopped breathing in her sleep a few times before." That memory lingers with me. The eerie silence, the darkness, Lily's fragile breath returning. It's like the night held its breath too. Now, fast forward to a more recent story from a friend of mine. Let's call him Jake. He lives with his girlfriend and her 3 kids in a house that's always felt off. Jake's sensitive to spirits, and over the years, he's had a few strange encounters. Lately, his girlfriend has been seeing shadowy figures, mostly near their bedroom doorway upstairs and by the kitchen. She's not scared though. She thinks it might be her uncle visiting since he passed away recently. But Jake? He feels something darker, more malevolent lurking around. One night, the kids were at their dad's, but Jake kept hearing a child coughing from the son's room. Creepy, right? Especially since the kids had been sick all week, and yet they weren't even home. The neighbor mentioned that a previous occupant had a boyfriend who died of a heart attack while mowing the lawn, right by their tree out front. Jake wonders if that's the restless energy they're feeling. Their laundry room is in the basement, and every time Jake goes down there, he feels like something's watching him. The air feels heavy, suffocating, especially in the daughter's room downstairs. They had some sage, so they opened all the windows and smudged the basement, hoping to clear the space. The girlfriend said she'd done the upstairs before Jake got home, though Jake isn't sure how thorough she was. After the smudging, the basement felt lighter, but still creepy. Upstairs, Jake's now feeling uneasy too. The girlfriend hasn't seen any shadow figures since the sage ritual, but Jake worries. Did they anger whatever is there? What should they do next? Could the smudging have upset the spirits? It's such a heavy feeling, isn't it? Living with that kind of presence, sometimes you just want peace, but you're stuck wondering if you've stirred something worse. So that's the story. 2 different homes, 2 different kinds of unsettling nights. One with a little girl waking me up before a terrifying moment, and another with shadow figures and heavy, watchful presences in the corners. Both left me feeling like the night holds secrets we can't quite grasp, and sometimes it's the silence and the shadows that speak the loudest. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and from a very young age I was taught that anything paranormal was connected to demons or some kind of dark spiritual force. I'm no longer part of that religion, but I'd be lying if I said those teachings disappeared completely. Somewhere deep inside me, that old fear is still there. At the same time, it created this intense curiosity about the supernatural. I was frightened by it, but I also wanted to understand it. After leaving the religion, I swung pretty far in the opposite direction. I became a firm atheist. I believed the physical world was all there was, and anything beyond that was just speculation. Ghost stories, strange visions, paranormal encounters. I assumed they were misunderstandings, tricks of the mind, or some kind of shared human tendency to turn imagination into reality. That explanation worked for me because I had never experienced anything I couldn't explain. At least, not until I was about 14. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went into the living room. I made myself a bowl of instant noodles and sat down to watch an old comedy show. I'd been there for maybe half an hour when I heard a soft rustling sound near the door at the far end of the room. At first, I ignored it. The air conditioner was running, so I told myself it was probably moving something nearby. Then the door gave a small shake. I stared at it. The handle began to turn. Not quickly, not violently. It turned slowly, right in front of me. Then the door started opening. It took several seconds, almost as though someone on the other side was trying not to make a sound. I couldn't move. I just sat there holding my fork, staring at the dark space behind the door. Nothing came through. Nothing appeared. But I stayed frozen in that chair for what felt like forever. For years, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe it was some unusually vivid dream in which my mind had recreated my entire morning routine. That explanation never felt completely right, though. It felt real. Much later, when I started college, I met someone who changed my life in more ways than one. I had been terrible at dating. During my first year, I asked out several people and got rejected every time. Eventually, I decided I was done trying. Then I met a quiet, funny girl in one of my art classes. I'll call her Mara. She was shy at first, but once she became comfortable, she was incredibly easy to talk to. We started spending time together, and before long, we were in a serious relationship. One evening, Mara told me that she sometimes saw things other people couldn't. She said she had seen glowing lights drifting through rooms, shadowy figures standing in doorways, and full human shapes that vanished when she looked directly at them. Once, she claimed she saw a pale creature moving on all fours across the floor of her childhood bedroom. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me thought there had to be a rational explanation. Another part of me remembered that slowly turning door handle from years earlier. Then, during summer break, I stayed for several nights at her father's house. Mara and I usually stayed up late watching movies, playing card games, or talking until neither of us could keep our eyes open. On the fourth night, she casually mentioned that there was an old Ouija board stored in a closet upstairs. My curiosity immediately took over. I asked her to bring it out. She agreed, but she made it clear that she wouldn't touch it. She believed that trying to communicate with spirits could attract something dangerous, especially for someone who was already sensitive to paranormal activity. She told me I could use it alone. Looking back, that should have been the moment I stopped. Instead, I placed my fingers on the planchette and asked, "Is anyone here with us?" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I felt a tingling sensation travel from my wrist to my elbow. The planchette began to move. It wasn't fast, and it didn't feel forceful. It felt like a gentle pull, almost as though my hands were resting on something floating in a slow current. It moved toward the word, yes. The moment it stopped, I said goodbye, pulled my hands away, and refused to touch the board again. The following night, Mara and I were sitting together on the couch. We were kissing when a man's voice came from the hallway beside us. It said one word. No. The voice was calm, but firm. We both pulled away at the same time. Mara's eyes widened and she asked, "Did you hear that?" I told her I had. There was no television playing. Her father was asleep at the other end of the house. No one else was there. I tried to reassure her, even though I was terrified myself. I held her face gently and told her that whatever was happening, she wasn't alone. About a minute later, something struck the back of the couch. It wasn't a creak or a small bump. It felt like someone had slammed both hands against it from behind. Mara jumped across the couch before I even understood what had happened. We turned around, but there was nothing there. Later, she told me that although she had seen strange things throughout her life, she had never heard a clear voice speak directly to her before. That was the part that stayed with me. Sometimes I wonder whether using that board invited something into the house. Something that hadn't been there before. Something that didn't want us getting too close. I'm not even sure where to begin, but lately I've been going through something of a spiritual journey. I grew up Christian, but over time I started questioning a lot of what I believed. I've slowly deconstructed my faith, and one of the hardest things for me has been not knowing what happens after we die. A while back, videos from a few mediums started appearing on my social media feed. I didn't go looking for them, but they caught my attention and made me wonder whether the people we love might still find ways to reach us. My grandfather passed away nearly 18 years ago, about 2 years after my grandmother. I was incredibly close to both of them, but my grandmother was my safe place. She helped raise me, and for most of my childhood, she was the person I trusted more than anyone. That's why it has always seemed strange that whenever I dream about one of them, it's my grandfather. The dreams have never been frightening. In one of them, I saw him sitting in his old armchair at home, looking peaceful and completely at ease. I remember waking up with the feeling that he was telling me, "I'm okay. Everything is all right." Still, I always wondered why my grandmother never appeared. Over the past few months, I started trying to connect with them in my own small way. Whenever they crossed my mind and I was alone, I would speak out loud. I'd tell them that I missed them, that I loved them, or that I hoped they were together. Then a few unusual things began happening around the house. One afternoon, my little girl's musical toy started playing by itself. It could easily have been a sticky button or a dying battery, so I tried not to read too much into it. But then I had a dream that felt different from the others. In the dream, my grandfather seemed weak, almost as though he were ill again. He told me that when it was time for him to leave, he wanted me to be there with him. I told him I would. There was also this strange tension in the dream. He seemed upset with my mother, though I couldn't understand why. She had been at the hospital when he died. I hadn't been there. I was at home with my younger brother. The dream stayed with me, but after a couple of weeks, I pushed it to the back of my mind. Then, one night, I went into the bathroom and switched on the light. It flickered several times, which was unusual, but I didn't think much of it at first. As I stood there, I suddenly realized I hadn't spoken to my grandparents in a while. I don't know how to explain it. Something just came over me, and I started talking to my grandfather out loud. I said, "Grandpa, I love you. I miss you. But if you're still holding on for some reason, you don't have to. It's okay to go. Grandma is waiting for you." The moment I finished speaking, the light dimmed until it was barely glowing. I completely froze. It wasn't a quick flicker. The room slowly became darker, almost as though the light itself were fading away. For some time, I'd carried this strange feeling that my grandfather might still be lingering nearby, as though part of him felt responsible for watching over me. Standing there in that dim bathroom, I wondered whether he had simply needed permission to let go. Once I managed to move, I rushed toward the switch and turned it off. But the light stayed on. I flipped the switch again and again until, eventually, the bulb returned to normal. Then I switched it off and stood there in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. I know how strange this sounds, but I stood in the bathroom doorway and said goodbye to both of my grandparents. And suddenly, a memory came rushing back. The last time I visited my grandfather in the hospital, I walked out of his room without telling him I loved him. I thought there would be another visit. I thought I had more time. He passed away that night. I have regretted that moment for years. Maybe the light was only faulty. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation for everything that happened. But part of me wonders whether that night was my chance to finally say the words I never got to say. Maybe it was my chance to tell him I loved him. And maybe, after all these years, it was his chance to say goodbye too. A few people asked me to share more about the church my husband and I used to clean at night, so I thought I'd finally tell the whole story. You don't need to know anything that happened before this. All you really need to know is that my husband and I had taken a small evening cleaning job during a difficult season in our lives. We cleaned 2 buildings each night, a credit union first, then a huge church on the edge of town. We usually reached the church a little after 8:30. By then, the parking lot would be empty, the last bit of daylight would be gone, and the entire building would be sitting there in silence. And I mean complete silence. For the first month or so, nothing strange happened. We vacuumed the sanctuary, mopped the hallways, emptied trash cans, and restocked the bathrooms. We'd listen to music from my husband's phone, talk about our day, and occasionally steal a kiss in one of the empty corridors before getting back to work. Honestly, those nights became some of my favorite memories from that time. Life was stressful, but inside that empty church, it felt like the world had finally stopped asking things from us. Then one night, everything changed. We were cleaning the kitchen when we heard a baby crying. It wasn't faint. It wasn't something coming from outside. and it definitely wasn't something only one of us noticed. We both heard it. The crying seemed to be coming from the sanctuary, which was completely dark. The strange part was that we had already cleaned that room. We knew no one had been in there when we left. My husband looked at me, and I looked at him. Neither of us spoke at first. Then we slowly walked down the hallway toward the sound. Every step we took echoed through the building, and the closer we got, the more uncomfortable I felt. My husband opened the sanctuary door. The crying stopped instantly. The room was empty. No lights, no movement. No one hiding between the rows of chairs. Nothing. We stood there for a few seconds, staring into the darkness. Finally, my husband said, "Let's finish up and get out of here." So that's what we did. But after that night, the church never felt empty again. We started hearing heavy doors slam somewhere in the building, even though we were certain we had closed them. Sometimes we heard footsteps moving across the fellowship hall after we had finished cleaning it. Whenever we checked, we found nothing. At least, we never found anyone. One evening, we were running late and didn't arrive until nearly 10. The church had several floors, a basement, long upstairs corridors, storage rooms, and a stairwell that led to the roof. Near our supply closet was a door leading up to the attic and storage area. That door was always locked. Except that night. When we walked into the closet, the door was standing wide open. We both stopped. Neither of us knew why it was open, or whether someone might be upstairs. I reached into my bag for the pepper spray I carried. My husband took out the firearm he kept legally secured while we worked. Then, he called up the stairs. "Is anybody up there? Please answer. We're armed, and we don't want anyone getting hurt." Silence. We waited. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. He called again. Still, no answer. Eventually, we started climbing. We moved slowly, checking every corner and calling out every few steps. The upstairs area felt much larger than I expected. There were rooms packed with old furniture, holiday decorations, stage costumes, artificial trees, and boxes that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. We kept going until we reached another staircase leading toward the roof. That was when we noticed the roof door was open too. Outside, a thin layer of fresh snow covered everything, and there were footprints in it. They were small, smaller than either of ours. The footprints crossed the roof in a straight line and ended at the edge. There were no tracks leading back. We carefully walked over and looked down. There was no one below, no disturbed snow, no sign that anyone had fallen or climbed down. Nothing. We had no idea who had made those footprints, how long they had been there, or why two doors that were normally locked had both been left open. Somehow, we went back downstairs and finished cleaning. I still don't know why. Maybe we needed the money badly enough that leaving didn't feel like an option. Another night, we noticed the lights were on inside the church daycare. We never cleaned that part of the building. We had specifically been told to leave it alone, and every other night, those lights had been off. They weren't automatic. Someone had to switch them on by hand. So we went inside to check. We looked behind the little tables, inside the play areas, and through the small classrooms. Everything appeared normal. No open windows, no missing toys. No one hiding inside. We switched off the lights, closed the glass doors, and went into the nearby offices to finish our work. A little while later, we were talking about ordinary things. I think we were discussing a hiking trail we wanted to try that weekend. Then we heard laughter coming from the daycare, but it didn't sound happy. It sounded like laughter tangled together with crying. A muffled, broken sound that made my skin crawl. We stopped working and stared at each other. I can still remember the look on my husband's face. It was the same thought I was having. Why us? We were already dealing with so much outside of that job. We had taken it because we needed something simple and predictable. Now even this place had become something we couldn't explain. We stepped out of the office and looked toward the daycare. The lights were still off. The glass doors were still closed. But that strange crying laughter continued from somewhere inside. We slowly walked toward it. The moment we reached the doors, it stopped. This time, we didn't go in. We had already searched the daycare once. We knew there was nobody there that we could help. So we left the doors closed. Whatever was inside, we decided it wasn't something we were equipped to deal with. Then there was the man in the window. One night, after we finished cleaning, we got into our car and started backing out of the parking space. I happened to glance toward one of the church windows. A man was standing inside. He wasn't waving. He wasn't knocking on the glass or trying to get our attention. He was simply watching us. I told my husband, and he looked over. The man didn't move. We drove away as quickly as we could. What frightened us most came afterward, when we started thinking about how many places there were to hide inside that building. Classrooms, offices, storage closets, basements, corridors, stairwells. If that man had been inside when we left, how long had he been there? Had he been inside while we were cleaning? Had he been watching us the entire night? We never found out. The next evening, we decided to arrive earlier while it was still daylight. During the day, the building felt different. It was easier to breathe. The long hallways didn't seem quite as threatening. But by the time we finished, it was dark again. As we walked toward our car, we noticed another vehicle parked several spaces away. Someone was sitting inside. We couldn't see the person clearly, and to this day, I don't know whether it was the same man from the church window. The moment we started walking toward our car, the vehicle's engine started. Its headlights came on. Then, it drove away. For a second, I felt relieved. But the vehicle hadn't actually left. When we pulled out of the parking lot, we saw it waiting near the entrance at the top of the hill. Neither of us said much. We drove past. The vehicle pulled out behind us. We turned onto another street. It followed. We drove several more blocks. It stayed right behind us. At that point, we weren't thinking about mysterious crying, footsteps, or strange doors anymore. This was real. A real person in a real vehicle was following us through town at night. We didn't want to drive home and show this person where we lived, so my husband started heading toward the police station. For several blocks, the headlights remained behind us. Every time I looked back, I kept thinking, who is this? What do they want from us? Eventually, the vehicle turned away. We never learned who was driving it. We don't know whether that person was connected to the man we saw standing inside the church. We don't know why they were waiting in the parking lot, why they stopped at the top of the hill, or why they followed us when we left. We only know that it happened. After that, the church didn't merely feel strange. It felt dangerous. Eventually, we told someone at the church about everything. We explained the crying, the footsteps, the slamming doors, the open stairwell, and the man watching us through the window. We weren't accusing anyone. We just wanted somebody to know what had been happening. We hoped they might check the security system or tell us whether there was a reasonable explanation for some of it. Instead, our supervisor called the next day. The church no longer wanted us cleaning there. That was all we were told. No questions, no investigation, no explanation. The job was simply over. After the call, my husband and I just looked at each other. Then, we started laughing. Not because anything was funny. We were exhausted. It felt like life had handed us one more ending we never saw coming. Even now, I can't tell you exactly what was happening inside that church. Maybe some of it had an ordinary explanation. Maybe all of it did. We never claimed the building was haunted, and we still don't know who those men were or whether they were connected to anything else we experienced. I can only tell you what happened to us. Every night, my husband and I entered that building believing we were cleaning an empty church. By the end, neither of us was convinced we had ever truly been alone. So, not long ago, I was installing a new coffee dispenser at an assisted living facility. I was working in a little service area just outside the main dining hall, trying to get everything connected before the afternoon rush. While I was tightening a few fittings, I noticed an elderly woman coming down the hallway toward me. She moved slowly, leaning on a dark wooden cane, and she had this worn, rose-colored shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Now, I've worked in quite a few retirement communities, and I've learned that some residents are simply happy to see a new face. Once they start talking, the conversation can go in a dozen different directions. Honestly, I usually enjoy it. Older people often have the best stories. But that day, I was behind schedule, and I remember thinking, please don't let this turn into a 20-minute conversation. Still, when she reached me, I smiled and said hello. She smiled back, and we started talking. At first, it was just small talk. She asked what I was installing, whether I liked coffee, and how long I'd been doing that kind of work. Then she started telling me about the building and how much it had changed over the years. We talked for about 5 minutes. At one point, I needed to crouch beneath the counter to attach a drainage hose. I told her, I have to duck under here for a moment, but I'm still listening. The second I lowered my head beneath the counter, she stopped speaking. I assumed she was waiting for me to finish. I couldn't have been down there longer than 10 seconds. But when I stood back up and turned around, she was gone. Completely gone. I looked toward the dining room, expecting to see her slowly making her way between the tables. There was no sign of her. Then I checked the hallway. Nothing. That was the part that bothered me. She had been moving so slowly that there was no possible way she could have disappeared that quickly. But I still had work to finish, so I pushed the strange feeling aside and went back to the installation. Later, the dining services supervisor came over to sign my paperwork. While she was filling out the forms, I casually mentioned the woman. I said, "One of your residents stopped to talk with me earlier." Sweet lady, but she vanished the second I looked away. I still can't figure out where she went. The supervisor stopped writing. She slowly looked up at me and said, "Did someone put you up to this?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. "No, why would anyone do that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Was she carrying a wooden cane?" I nodded. Then she said, "And was she wearing a faded pink shawl?" That was when the room suddenly felt colder. "Yes," I said. "Exactly." The supervisor leaned back in her chair and stared at me for a moment. Then she gave this quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. "So you met Mrs. Thibodeau?" I asked her who that was. Her expression changed. It became softer, almost sad. She told me that Eleanor Thibodeau had lived at the facility for many years. She had been friendly, curious, and especially fond of talking to new employees. Then the supervisor paused and said, "She passed away in 2011. I didn't know what to say. According to her, several employees had reported seeing Mrs. Thibodeau over the years. Some had noticed her walking through the halls with her cane. Others had seen her sitting quietly in the dining room or near the recreation area. A few new staff members had even claimed that she spoke to them. The strangest part was that she sometimes warned people to check on certain residents, and, supposedly, those residents would become seriously ill soon afterward. Now, I can't prove any of that. I can't prove that the woman I spoke to was a ghost. But standing there, listening to the supervisor describe her, I felt something deep in my chest. I knew she was telling the truth. The woman she described was the same woman who had stood beside me. The same gentle voice, the same cane, the same faded shawl, and there was simply no way she could have crossed that hallway in 10 seconds. It may not be the most terrifying ghost story you've ever heard. There were no screams, no flickering lights, and no shadowy figure standing at the end of a corridor. It was just a quiet conversation with a kind old woman, a woman who had apparently been gone for 15 years. I'm scheduled to return to the facility later this summer for a maintenance check, and this time, I plan to ask the staff a lot more questions. And Mrs. Thibodeau, wherever you are, you're welcome to stop by again. Next time, I promise I won't be in such a hurry. Hey there. I want to share something really personal about my son Jake, who's 9 years old. Lately, we've noticed he's been having trouble sleeping in his own room. Now, this didn't just start overnight. It gradually became clear when he began asking for one of us to stay with him, or would just end up in our bed. What's unusual is that Jake has never been afraid to sleep alone since he was a baby. But recently, he's been making excuses, playing little games, anything to avoid going to his room by himself. Jake's never been one to fear the dark or have nightmares. When we moved into this new house, he adjusted really quickly. The only time he had bad dreams was last year during the whole pandemic scare. He was worried about us getting sick, and it really shook him up. We had to make a rule to turn off the news because it was affecting him so much. Last night, it really hit a peak. My wife was putting away clothes in Jake's closet, and he suddenly freaked out about the closet doors being open. That's when it hit me. I realized I'd hardly ever seen those doors open before. I asked my wife if she always closed them, and she said no, Jake didn't want them open. That scared me because it wasn't like him at all. I sat down with Jake on his bed and told him he could tell me anything. For nearly 45 minutes, he just shook his head, avoiding my questions. So I said, "If anyone or anything is telling you not to tell me, it's okay. I'm your dad, and I can fix it." I thought maybe a kid at school, a cousin, or even something he saw on YouTube was scaring him, but he said no one had scared him about the closet. I tried to explain that sometimes old houses make noises because the wood expands and contracts, and it's normal. Then I asked if there was something in the closet that scared him, something I could get rid of. That's when he started crying quietly. I held him close and told him it was okay, that he wasn't in trouble and that it was my job to keep him safe. I looked him in the eyes and gently asked him to tell me what it was. With tears rolling down, he looked down and said, "The skulls come out at night from the floor and watch me while I sleep." I wasn't expecting that, and honestly, my stomach tightened. I told him it was okay. Sometimes our imagination plays tricks on us and makes us scared. I asked when this started, and he said it wasn't nightmares. They come after he wakes up and sees them. I explained to him that imagination can give us good ideas, but sometimes, especially when we're trying to sleep, it can give us scary thoughts. I promised that when I sleep in his room, he can tell me or show me if he's scared, and I'll check it out. But he still insists on keeping his closet doors shut. It's been tough, but I'm grateful he trusts me enough to share this. As a dad, I'm doing everything I can to help him feel safe and loved. Hey, I want to share this little story from when I was a university student working as a cleaner. I had this job cleaning offices overnight, which was perfect because they didn't really care what time you came in, as long as the work was done between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. One particular place I cleaned every Thursday was a law firm on the top floor of a heritage building downtown. It was a 6-story building with a rich, eerie history. They said it used to be a brothel, and that the site was once the town square where hangings happened. So you can imagine how that made me want to wrap up my cleaning quickly each night. The law firm's floor was designed in a circle, with reception by the elevator, washrooms to the right, individual offices around the edges, a big boardroom in the center, and the staff break room on the opposite side. Every time I stepped off the elevator, I'd get this odd feeling like someone was there, even though the place was empty. The later it got, the stronger that feeling became. One night, I got to the office pretty late, close to midnight, after staying late at school. As soon as the elevator doors opened, I heard voices, laughter. It sounded like some women were chatting away in the break room, and honestly, I felt relieved. I was a bit scared being alone so late, so I walked toward the break room, calling out a friendly hello to let them know I was there. But when I turned the corner, the voices stopped, and the room was completely empty. I stood there, frozen for a moment, then figured maybe they were in one of the offices on the other side. So I kept calling out as I went around the floor, but no one was there. The whole building was empty. Yet that chatter I heard was so clear it gave me chills. When I finally made my way back to the elevator, it opened on its own. I didn't stick around after that. I just got my card on the elevator and left as fast as I could. Honestly, that night was hands down one of the creepiest experiences I've had. Just thinking about it now gives me the chills. No way am I ever going back there after dark alone again. Hey, I want to share something a little strange that happened to me when I was a kid. Maybe you've experienced something like this too. So, there were 2 times I just fell into this really deep, almost unconscious sleep. The first time was during summer break when I was home alone because my parents were at work. I heard a noise coming from their bedroom and went to check it out, thinking maybe it was a mouse or something. But when I got there, everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place. Then, as I was walking back to my room, I saw this full-sized shadow of a man on the hallway wall. The thing is, the hallway lights are on the ceiling, and normally shadows only fall on the floor, never on the walls. Plus, it was around 11 in the morning, so no lights were on, and the rooms around the hallway don't cast shadows in that spot. It was weird. I went into my room, faced the hallway wall, and just lay down on the bed, and I fell asleep. I woke up about 6 hours later when my mom came back and shook me awake. She'd been ringing the doorbell and calling out, but I didn't respond at all. This was odd because I'm usually a light sleeper. Any little noise would wake me up. The second time was when my dad was out of town, and my mom and sister went out to get groceries. I took an afternoon nap after they left, feeling pretty fresh. I told them I'd answer the door if anyone came, but they still took the keys just in case. After they left, I was reading my favorite book when I heard the doorbell. It was one of our neighbors asking for my dad, and I told him he wasn't home. After he left, I locked both the wired screen door and the wooden door with the key. I started feeling uneasy, and somehow I fell asleep in the living room without realizing it. Hours later, my sister woke me up, telling me that people had been ringing the doorbell, my dad was calling on the landline, and neighbors were shouting my name. The neighbors even had to climb up the balcony, cut the screen door, and let my family in through the house. My parents were really worried about these incidents, even though they happened years apart. They took me to the doctor and ran tests, but there was no explanation. I don't know what to make of it, but these experiences have always stuck with me. Have you ever had something like this happen? It's like your body just decides to shut down completely, even when the world is trying to get your attention. Hey there. I want to share a story from when I was about 13, spending the Christmas holidays at a boarding school that, well, had quite the reputation for being a bit haunted. So, my parents were too busy to have me home for the holidays, which was a bummer, but I stayed put. Most of my friends had gone home, so I was pretty much on my own, just reading and trying to rest, since boarding school life was pretty intense with classes 6 days a week and church on Sundays. Only one afternoon off? Yeah, not much downtime at all. Now, the strange things seemed to get bolder when fewer people were around. Only a handful of boys stayed over the break, none from my dorm, which I thought was great at first. The first nights were fine until odd noises started, screams and moaning from the courtyard. I figured it was older boys playing tricks, but it was still unnerving. Then, one morning, I woke up to find all the beds in my dorm pushed to one side except mine. Freaked me out, but again, I thought it was a prank, so I just moved them back. Later, in the shower room, I met this older boy. Let's call him Toby. He was planning a sneaky midnight feast in the kitchen and invited me to join. I'd never broken any rules before, but he seemed confident he'd never been caught, so I said yes. I even dressed in all black to sneak around better. Toby thought I was a bit of a nerd for that, but hey, I wanted to avoid getting caught. We got to the kitchen and started helping ourselves to ice cream, but suddenly, a whole shelf of canned food crashed to the floor, and the kitchen doors slammed shut. We grabbed what we could and ran. On our way back, we heard footsteps, so we hid, but no one appeared. Then, out of nowhere, something grabbed my leg and yanked it. I got up, looked around, no one there. We sprinted away, but Toby got yanked too, falling and hitting his head, giving himself a bloody nose. Luckily, he was tough and got up quickly. We made it back safely and promised not to talk about it. That night, I was too scared to sleep in my dorm. Suddenly, all the beds slammed to the far side of the room again, and I'd had enough. I went to Toby's dorm, told him what happened, and he understood. He let me crash there for the rest of the holidays. The good news? Toby watched out for me while he was there, and we're still in touch today. So yeah, that holiday was a mix of fear, friendship, and a little bit of mystery I'll never forget. Hey, I want to share something deeply personal with you. You know, I've always believed in spirits and the idea that those we've lost might still find ways to reach out. Recently, I had this dream that felt so real, so different from any dream before that I just have to tell you about it. So, let me set the scene. My uncle Eric, well, in the dream, he was sitting there beside my grandma Marie. Both have passed on. Eric back in 2008, and Grandma just a couple of years ago in 2021. I remember Eric was such a strong guy. Even when he was battling a brain tumor, losing parts of himself physically and emotionally, he never really let it get him down. Grandma Marie, she was the heart of our family, and her sudden passing hit us all hard. In the dream, it was like a calm camping spot, the kind of place where my family would gather every summer. I was walking toward these two chairs, and there they were, sitting side by side. I was stunned. I even asked someone, "Can you see them too?" And they said yes. Eric had this peaceful look on his face, so vivid I still can't quite put it into words. He had his arm gently around Grandma's shoulder, and she looked genuinely happy, something I hadn't seen in a long time. They didn't speak, but their presence was so comforting. When I reached out and touched Eric's knee, I realized they looked different from anyone else, like they belonged to another world, but were there just for me. Waking up was a mix of emotions. At first I thought, just a dream. But as the day went on, I felt this profound sense of peace wash over me. I even shared it with another grandmother figure in my life, telling her how it didn't feel like a regular dream, but more like a true visit. You see, after losing Grandma Marie and our beloved Chihuahua, Milo, so suddenly in 2021, I struggled a lot. The grief was overwhelming, especially since Milo's passing was unexpected too. But this dream, this visit, it was like they came to wrap me in a warm hug from beyond, reminding me that I'm not alone and that they're still with me in some way. So, I truly believe that night, Uncle Eric and Grandma Marie stopped by to give me the comfort I desperately needed. And honestly, nothing anyone says can change how real that felt to me. Hey there. I want to share a story that's really close to my heart. Something from when I was just a tiny kid, barely a year and a half old. See, I've always been a bit sensitive to things that most people might call paranormal or unexplainable. To me, it's just part of life, and a big reason why goes back to those earliest memories. My mom used to say she'd watch me through the crack of my bedroom door because I was always talking to someone. This was usually in the mornings before she'd come in to pick me up. She noticed I'd be having these little baby conversations with something in the corner of the room. When she stepped inside, she could feel there was something else there with us, a presence that wasn't scary or harmful at all. In fact, she always described it as a loving energy, like a guardian watching over me. That made her feel safe, and I think it gave her peace knowing I wasn't alone. Sometimes, when she was feeding me in the living room, she'd say I'd suddenly turn my head as if someone had called my name from another room. She could sense that same presence nearby. She told me about all this many times over the years, but I never really shared my own memories until recently. What's really unusual is that I remember being in my crib, clear as day. Most people don't remember things from that young an age, but I do. I'd see these beautiful, swirling patterns of light, kind of like stars moving around me, like a tiny universe unfolding in the dark. It was mesmerizing, and honestly, it helped me drift off to sleep. But sometimes, I'd wake up at night because something would gently touch and tickle my feet. I'd look down, and there'd be a pale, almost translucent hand reaching out, as if to play with me like a kitten or a puppy. The rest of the arm seemed to disappear into the shadows, so I could only see the hand. I never felt scared. Maybe because my mom's feelings about this presence were so comforting, or maybe because I just hadn't learned to be afraid yet. I'd think something like, "I'm sleepy, stop that," in the way a baby might, and the hand would quietly retreat back into the darkness. The soft glow in my room came from the hallway outside, so although the room was mostly dark, I could see the door's outline. I'd look for whoever the hand belonged to, but they were always just out of sight. It felt like there was a kind, protective presence there, watching over me through the night. Recently, my mom told me she never mentioned any of this to my dad before they separated. But before they split, she finally told him about the strange feeling in our old apartment. And you know what? He admitted he felt it too. He said, "Yeah, there was definitely something there." So that's my story, the story of the gentle hand in my crib, a mysterious, tender presence that kept me company when I was just a baby. Whether you call it paranormal or just a loving energy, it shaped how I see the world, full of unseen kindness and wonder, both day and night. Hey there, I want to share with you a story from my childhood that still stays with me. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, but I grew up in Brooklyn. Every summer, though, I'd escape to my grandmother's house tucked away in the mountains of Yauco. It was a place so remote The roads thinned out into narrow mountain paths where cliffs pressed close to the car, and if another vehicle came by, one of us had to back up until we found a safe spot to pass. It was nerve-wracking, let me tell you. My great-grandfather, whom I called Papi, was a huge part of those summers. He was almost entirely Taino, Puerto Rico's indigenous people, and farmed the land, looked after cows, and shared stories that felt like a bridge to a forgotten time. He spoke about the Taino who hid in the mountains to preserve their way of life, away from the Spanish who, he said, would kill them if they were found. I remember learning from him how to guide a bull by its horns, to ride it, and even a unique whistle that only he could make. That whistle would call animals to him, calm them, or guide them as if by magic. One summer, when Papi was nearing 100, he was very ill. Our whole family came to see him, neighbors and relatives gathering at the hilltop house he lived in. I was too young to understand what was happening when he passed, so my grandmother sent me down to her house to wait. As dusk fell, the mountains around me grew shadows, and suddenly, the animals of the mountain erupted into cries I had never heard before. Wild dogs howling, pigs screaming like people, cows mourning with a sound so heart-wrenching it reminded me of a scene from a story I'd later hear about loss and grief. I was alone, scared, and hiding inside, peeking out the window. Eventually, the noise faded, and I asked my grandmother why all the animals had been so upset. She told me it was because Papi's spirit had left us, and the animals, who had known his strength and protection, were mourning. They just knew. That night, restless and curious, I snuck outside near the edge of a cliff. The darkness was thick, and a wild cry echoed close by, freezing me in place. I was too afraid to call out, so I just listened. Then, out of the silence came that unmistakable whistle, Papi's whistle. Even though I knew he'd passed, I felt him there, deep in the mountain shadows. No one else could make that sound, and it seemed impossible someone was out there, but I believed he was. Yauco is a land rich with history, the home of Aguebana, the great Taino chief, and the birthplace of a rebellion against the Spanish. Many Taino found refuge in those mountains, living quietly, holding on to their traditions. Some say the Taino are long gone, but I know otherwise. Papi, my family and I carry that spirit with us. In some ways, I am still one of them. Hey there, I want to share something deeply personal with you, something that happened during one of the hardest chapters of my life. Back then, I was going through a lot. My son and I had lost our home because of gentrification, and I had just lost my job. On top of that, a relationship I cared about was falling apart, and the woman I was with wasn't really there for me emotionally. It felt like everything was crumbling around me. Meanwhile, my son's mother was battling her own mental health struggles, so I was the main emotional anchor for my boy. Watching him so unhappy was honestly the toughest part. Every night, I'd lie awake thinking, this has to be what hell feels like. I was so weighed down by it all, I couldn't even cry. I just felt frozen in this heavy sadness. During that time, I started experiencing something strange, sleep paralysis. I'd wake up halfway through the night, completely unable to move. I was sleeping in our cramped living room because that's all I could afford. Even though I could see the room clearly, I wasn't fully awake. It was like being caught between sleep and reality. And in those moments, I'd sense this presence in the room. It wasn't human, that's for sure. It felt like a dark, swirling mist with a vague shape that slowly moved toward me. It came with this overwhelming feeling of dread, like it was feeding off my fear. I've been through a lot in life, believe me. Growing up in Brooklyn, I've faced some tough people and tough situations. Now, as a social worker, I help others who've been through their own battles. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for this. It was like this force was from another dimension, a place I only glimpsed during those twilight moments between sleep and wakefulness. I fought every time, trying to either fully wake up or drift back to sleep, but it was like being stuck in a dangerous in-between where that presence had power over me. My whole body would shake with terror until I finally jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, knowing I'd just been face to face with something truly real, but beyond this world. What helped me turn the tide was the same thing that helped me rebuild my life. I started searching for work again, went back to school, and began family therapy. Slowly, hope returned. I also started exploring my spiritual beliefs more deeply, tuning into a lifelong inner voice that reminded me of my capacity for unconditional love, both for myself and others. This fear, I realized, was something external, an illusion I allowed inside. But when I centered myself, stayed calm, and trusted my own strength, I could face it. Then, one night, when that dark presence came again, I did something different. Even while still caught in that half-awake state, I found the strength to stand up, at least in spirit. I didn't back down. It came closer, stronger than ever, but I moved toward it with courage. It was like that exhilarating moment when you watch something epic unfold, goosebumps and all. Without words, just with pure will, I sent it a message. "Get out of here. You don't belong." And just like that, it left. I woke up fully or drifted off peacefully. It didn't matter anymore. It tried once or twice more, and I stood my ground every time. It's been years since then. My life has changed so much. We have a nice apartment now, I'm finishing up school, my son is about to graduate high school, and our family is closer than ever. Just a few days ago, I caught a glimpse of that presence again, small and harmless this time. I laughed, walked right up to it, and told it to go away. And it did, just like shooing away a pesky mosquito. Thanks for listening. If you ever want to talk more about this or have questions, I'm here. Hey there. I want to share a pretty strange experience my girlfriend and I had during a camping trip in the Smoky Mountains. For her birthday, I took her to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is this bustling little town right by the mountains. We decided to camp our first night out at Elkmont Campground, a really popular spot surrounded by tall trees that reminded me a bit of baby redwoods, and a clear river with rocks scattered all over. There were families around, kids running about. It felt like a perfect little nature escape. We borrowed a tent, but realized we forgot the stakes, so we headed back into town at dusk to grab some supplies: whiskey, hot dogs, and of course, tent stakes. When we got back, most campers were winding down their fires or packing up for the night. Our tent was still up but kind of scrunched since it wasn't properly staked. We fixed it and started a fire to get cozy. A couple hours later, around midnight, we were sitting by the campfire. The campground is pretty tight-knit. Campsites are only about 30 yards apart. Bears are known to wander around, so my girlfriend was a bit nervous. That's why I picked a spot right in the center of the campground for some peace of mind. Almost everyone else had gone to sleep, and all we could hear was the soft crackling of the fire and the gentle flow of the river nearby. The moon was just a thin crescent behind clouds, so it was pretty dark. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a light appeared from the campsite just behind my girlfriend and a little to my left. It was shining straight at us, then darting around like it was searching for something. Kind of like the Eye of Sauron, if you can picture that. We saw the silhouette of a man wearing a headlamp, but his movements were so odd. Almost like a weird kind of walk. Kind of how Jar Jar Binks moves in Star Wars, if that makes sense. Whenever I glanced at him, he'd immediately flash his light at us. He kept shining the light on his picnic table, barely moving his hands, then stepping back to his tent to shine the light there, then back to the table, then at us again, repeating this over and over for nearly an hour. At first, I thought maybe he was just searching for something, but his behavior was just so strange and repetitive, it felt off. Eventually, when his light stayed on us too long, I shined my flashlight back at him for a while. And that's when things got really creepy. A chill ran down my spine as I watched his outline vanish right before my eyes. The light from his headlamp dropped to the ground and then seemed to move across the ground by itself, almost like it was running or crawling into the bushes diagonally between our campsites. I took my flashlight away and saw the light slowly come back out of the bushes, rising back up to the height of a person. Then the shadowy figure appeared again, walking out and returning to his strange routine, all without making a single sound. Later, we went into our tent to sleep, but the figure kept up his odd behavior through the night. The next morning, we looked over to that campsite and there was no sign anyone had been there. No tent. Nothing. It was like the place had been deserted without a trace. Afterward, I learned there's a small town just a mile away called Elkmont Ghost Town, with abandoned buildings and even a cemetery up a nearby trail. I haven't found any other stories about this mysterious headlamp man, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if others have had similar eerie encounters. Hey, I want to share some personal experiences that have been a part of my life since I was a little kid. I'm now 27, and ever since I was about 7 years old, I've encountered things that most people would call paranormal. It all began when my older sister and her friends were messing around with an Ouija board. They were around 11 or 12, and I was just a curious 7-year-old. My grandmother once told me that because I was the youngest and most innocent, something kind of attached itself to me that day. I have lots of stories, but I'll stick to a few shorter ones unless you want to hear more. One time, my mom saw this black figure crawling down the hallway on all fours, almost like a twisted person with dislocated joints. It was wearing one of my Halloween masks, a skull with horns. When my mom turned to look at it, it vanished. She actually screamed my name, thinking I was playing a prank. When she saw me peek out from the living room, her face went pale. She made me find that same mask and insisted it be taken out of the house right away. Another story involves my grandmother waking up multiple nights to see a little boy in an old-fashioned sailor suit from the early 1800s. His skin was pale and had this eerie dark blue-black coloring around his eyes and lips. It was unsettling for her, but she never knew who he was. Once, I was playing with my dog, throwing a blanket over my head and letting him pull it off. Suddenly, he started whimpering and seemed scared. Before I could figure out what was wrong, I heard a deep, raspy male voice breathe heavily right into my ear and then exhale. My dog went into a frenzy, barking wildly. There was also this one morning, around 5:30 a.m., when I woke up because someone whispered my name into my ear. It was a male voice that sounded a lot like my husband, or maybe my brother, but both were miles away at the time. After that, my usually aloof orange cat jumped up on my pillow and stayed close, while my other two cats just stared from the doorway, refusing to come in. It freaked me out, especially since I'm 9 months pregnant and usually pretty tuned in to what's real and what isn't. This felt different. One night, I was driving home early in the morning, around 3 a.m., and everything was eerily silent in the city, like nature had gone quiet before a storm. I saw a jogger waiting to cross the street, but as I turned to drive away, he stepped into the road and started twisting his body in unnatural ways, almost like his bones were breaking. He sprinted at my car with huge predatory eyes and a terrifying mouth. I floored it and didn't look back until I was safely home. When I finally did, he was just standing there, watching me go. These experiences have shaped how I see the world, It's strange living with these moments that don't fit into everyday explanations, but they've become a part of my story, and maybe they'll be a part of yours now too. I grew up in a house with a strange little secret built into it. The upstairs walls were not really solid in the way you would expect. Behind most of them, there were crawl spaces that ran along the upper floor and even connected down toward the basement. When I was little, my brother, my sister, and I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. We would squeeze into those narrow spaces with flashlights, blankets, and snacks, building little forts inside the walls like we had discovered some hidden kingdom. It was filthy in there, dust everywhere, spiders in the corners, old insulation that made our skin itch and left tiny fiberglass scratches on our arms. But when you are a kid, things like that do not matter much. To us, it was adventure. My mom knew we played in there, and she never seemed too worried about it. By the time I was a teenager, though, my siblings had both moved out. It was just me and my mom in the house, and I had long since stopped crawling around inside the walls. That part of my childhood felt packed away, like old toys in a box. Then one night, I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV when I heard something shift behind the wall. At first, I barely reacted. Houses make noises, you know? Pipes knock, wood settles, old floors complain for no reason. So when the sound stopped, I just went back to watching my show. But then it happened again. And again. Not every minute, not loudly enough to make me panic, but often enough that I started noticing. A soft scrape behind the wall. A creak from somewhere inside the crawl space. A dull little bump that seemed to come from above us, then beside us. My mom heard it too. At first we joked that we had a ghost. It was easier to laugh than to admit how unsettling it felt. But over time, the noises became harder to explain, and the joke started to feel less funny. One night, my mom and I were both in the living room when there was a heavy thud from inside the wall. Not a creak, not a pipe, a thud. We both froze and looked at each other. I remember her face so clearly, like she was silently asking me, "You heard that too, right?" She got up, walked over to the wall, and gave it one quick knock. A few seconds later, something knocked back. Only it was not a polite little tap. It was a hard bang from the other side. My mom and I screamed and ran straight out of the house into the front yard. We stood there in the grass, shaking, staring back at the windows like the house itself had turned its head toward us. After that, we were convinced it was haunted. We sprayed holy water around the rooms. My mom prayed out loud. I even remember us asking whatever it was to leave us alone or speak or give us some kind of sign. Nothing answered. But the noises kept happening. The walls still shifted. We still heard knocks. And then things started disappearing. At first, it was small. My mom lost her keys one morning and searched for nearly 2 hours before finding them outside in the yard. Then some of my makeup vanished. Food went missing faster than it should have. Sometimes we would come home and find cabinet doors hanging open, drawers pulled out. Things moved just enough to make your stomach sink. After about 6 months, we were both terrified. I usually slept alone, but one night I just could not do it. Something about my room felt wrong. I kept staring at my closet, feeling like something was staring back from the darkness. At that age, I wanted so badly to be brave. I wanted to be the kind of girl who could roll her eyes at fear and sleep with the lights off. But I was not brave that night. I was scared in a way that felt deep and childish and humiliating. So I ran to my mom's room and slept beside her. That feeling of being watched stayed with me for weeks. Then everything finally came out. I was not home when it happened, and honestly, I am thankful for that. My mom came home early from work one afternoon because she was not feeling well. When she got upstairs, she heard movement coming from my bedroom. She opened my door and saw a man sitting on my bed. A thin, dirty, scraggly-looking man, just sitting there like he belonged there. He looked up at her and smiled. My mom ran out of the house and called the police. What they told us afterward was worse than any ghost story we had made up in our heads. That man had been living inside our walls for months. He had been using the crawl spaces to move around the house. He had been coming out when we were gone, taking food, stealing small things, opening cabinets, going through drawers. Every scrape I heard behind the wall, every thud, every strange knock, every time I felt like someone was watching me, it was him. And the part that still makes my skin go cold is this. The only entrance to the crawl space was in my closet. So all those nights I lay there staring at that door, feeling like something was on the other side, I was right. Hi, I'm Jay, and I'm giving full permission for my name and story to be shared. I don't really know why I've been so nervous about sending this in. I've thought about it so many times, and then I'd stop myself. But I think I'm finally ready to just take a breath and tell it. Before I get into what happened that night, I do need to give a content warning because this story is tied to something very painful from my childhood. When I was 10, my best friend lived just a couple houses down from me. Her name was Marin, and she was only 8. She was murdered by her stepfather, along with her mother and baby sister, before he took his own life. It was horrific, and it changed everything. My neighborhood never felt the same after that. Honestly, the energy there had always been strange, and that was not the only tragedy connected to the area, but that is a whole other story. The important thing is that I still live in the same house I grew up in. I've been here for about 25 years, and that house where everything happened is still only 2 doors away. My backyard is pretty large, and it is fully fenced in with a privacy fence. There are 2 regular gates on one side, both with secure latches that can only be opened from inside the yard. Then there is a larger double-door entrance, the kind you could use to bring something big into the yard. That one locks with a metal post that drops into the ground, plus a lock, and again, it is all secured from the inside. At the time, my girlfriend, who is now my fiancée, and I were sleeping in our old bedroom on the first floor. One window faced the backyard, and the other faced that double-door gate. That second window was right behind the head of our bed, which still gives me chills thinking about it. One night, it was probably close to 1 in the morning, and we were trying to fall asleep when we heard this strange fiddling sound outside. Then suddenly, there was a loud bang, exactly like those double doors had been swung open. We both froze. Then we shot up, because there was no reason anyone should have been opening that gate in the middle of the night. And again, the way it was locked, someone should not have been able to open it from outside the yard. I was terrified someone was trying to break in, so I slowly peeked through the window behind us, the one facing the double doors. Nothing. The doors were closed. But I know what I heard. We both heard it. It was the sound of those doors, even the creak of them. So now I'm panicking a little, and I get up to check the other window, the one facing the rest of the yard. And that's when I saw him. It looked like the full black silhouette of a man walking through my backyard. No face, no features, no clothes I could make out, just a solid, dark shape moving across the yard. Then he faded away. Not ran, not ducked behind something. He just disappeared, like he walked straight into nothing. I don't know how to explain what came over me, but I felt this horrible certainty in my body. I felt like it was him, the man who killed my friend. I know that sounds like a huge thing to say, and at the time I didn't have proof. My neighborhood is full of strange activity, and honestly, it could have been so many things. But something in me knew. It was the fear, the anger, the heaviness of it. I just knew. Nothing else happened that night. My fiancé calmed me down, and eventually I went back to bed. But the next morning is when it got even stranger. For a little bit of background, I used to have a small online following. Nothing huge, but enough that I didn't always use my real name online, just to be careful. So a lot of friends I made through social media knew me by my internet name. Some of them did know my real name, but they still mostly used the name they met me with, and I never minded. One of those friends, someone I talked to every day at the time, is very spiritually sensitive. That morning, they texted me like usual to say good morning. I had not told them anything about what happened the night before. But then they said they had a really strange dream. They told me there was a young girl with brown hair, and she kept repeating the same thing over and over. "Tell Jay it's okay. Tell Jay everything is okay." My heart just stopped. My friend was confused because they didn't know who Jay was, or they thought maybe the name meant something else. And I had to remind them that Jay is my real name. The second I said that, it felt like we both understood. They knew about what happened to my childhood friend because it is still a big part of my life, even now as an adult. So I told them about the gate, the sound, the figure in the yard, and that awful feeling I had. We came to two possible conclusions. Either it was not him, and Marin knew I was scared and wanted me to know I was safe, or it was him, and she protected me from whatever he was, or whatever energy came with him that night. For whatever reason, she never seems to come directly to me. She always finds another way, and that actually has a pattern. Back when everything happened, on that last day, we had spent the whole day together. We rode bikes, made little bracelets, and my dad even cooked dinner so she could eat with us. Afterwards, she went home, and later that night, everything unfolded in the most tragic way. The night after it happened, my dad had a dream about her. In the dream, she came to him and said, "Thank you for dinner, and thank you for letting me be friends with your daughter." That has stayed with me my entire life. So that's my story. I know it's a sad one, but to me, there is something soft at the center of it too. Something that feels like love still reaching through, even after all this time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for giving me a place to share it. I have so many more stories about her, my neighborhood, and even a haunted museum I used to work at. I'll definitely share more when I'm ready. I've been turning this over in my head for months now. It happened a little over 5 months ago, but I think I'm only just starting to understand how strange it really was. So, for a bit of background, my younger brother and I live with our grandmother. My mom and dad have their own places nearby. They're not together anymore, but they've always had this quiet, friendly kind of partnership. They still check in on each other, still spend time together sometimes. Nothing dramatic there. But near the end of winter, I started having these dreams. At first, they were just unsettling. I kept finding myself in this empty town packed with traffic. Cars were moving, engines were growling, horns were blaring. Everything felt alive with noise. Except there were no people. Not one. No drivers, no pedestrians, nobody standing in windows. Just this city moving by itself. I'd wake up every night with this awful dread sitting in my chest. It wasn't just fear. It felt more urgent than that. Like there was something I needed to do, something important, but my brain wouldn't let me see what it was. Then the dreams got worse. By the second week, the town looked ruined. Cars were smashed into each other, some were burning. The streets looked warped and wrong, almost dreamlike in the worst way. And then my dad started showing up. Every night after that, something terrible happened to him. It was never the same thing twice. One night it was a phone call from a hospital. Another night it was a flood. Then a storm. then a crash. Sometimes it was something completely surreal, but it always came back to the same thing. Me, my dad, and this horrible feeling that I was too late. I'm anxious in everyday life, sure, but my dreams had always been kind of a safe place for me. I almost never had nightmares. So when this kept happening, night after night, it really started wearing me down. I was sleeping badly, waking up sore, snapping at little things. Around the same time, my mom started saying she wasn't sleeping well either, but I didn't really ask why. By the end of the 3rd week, I finally booked an appointment with my therapist. I figured maybe stress was bubbling up in some strange way, and my brain had decided to turn it into a horror movie. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the dreams. I didn't want to scare them. So I went to the appointment, sat down, and started explaining everything. The empty city, the cars, the feeling, my dad appearing over and over. And right in the middle of that session, this wave of pure panic hit me. Nothing had happened. There was no sound, no message, no reason for it. But suddenly I knew, in this deep and terrible way, that I needed to go home immediately. I couldn't sit there anymore. I apologized, left about 10 minutes early, and practically ran to the bus stop. While I was waiting, I texted my dad and told him I wanted to see him that day. That was unusual for me. I don't really text him like that. Usually I just call or walk into his apartment because I have a key. We didn't have plans. I figured he was probably out somewhere playing chess, like he usually did on certain afternoons. I got on the bus and tried calling him a couple of times. No answer. At first, I told myself that was normal. He might have been busy. He might have left his phone in his coat. He might have been in the middle of a game. Then my mom called. She told me she had left work early because she suddenly felt like she needed to check on him. That made me pause. My mom never leaves work early unless something is really wrong. But still, I tried to calm myself down. I told myself we were both just anxious. I told myself it was nothing. About half an hour later, I got back to my grandmother's place to drop off my things before going to my dad's apartment. And at almost the exact same moment, my mom walked in too. She looked shaken. Her face was tight, and I could tell she had been crying. That's when she told us my dad had suffered a stroke. It had happened while I was on the bus and while she was leaving work. Somehow, both of us had felt that same panic at almost the same time. She got to him first because she was closer. She found him, called the ambulance, and then came straight to my grandmother's house to tell us. We sat in the kitchen afterward, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it. Then my mom told me something that honestly made my skin go cold. She had been having the same dreams. Not exactly the same scenes, but the same pattern. The first week, just strange and uncomfortable. The second week, darker and more frightening. The third week, my dad started appearing in them. She had been waking up scared too. She had been losing sleep too. Neither of us had told the other. And then, on the day I finally said the dreams out loud to someone, everything happened. My dad had no known health problems. He was healthy, active, stubborn in the way dads can be. He had never given us a reason to think something like this was coming. And neither my mom nor I had any normal reason to go to his apartment at that exact time. But somehow, from two different parts of town, we both got pulled toward him. Because my mom arrived when she did, he got medical help quickly. He recovered far better than anyone expected, and I still think about how different things could have been if she had ignored that feeling. I don't know what I believe now. I've always been skeptical about paranormal things. I like explanations. I like logic. I like when the world keeps its furniture where it belongs. But I don't have an explanation for this. I don't know why we had those dreams. I don't know why they grew worse in the same way. I don't know why both of us felt that sudden terror at the same time. The only thing I can say is that something, somehow, got us moving. And honestly, knowing my dad, I wouldn't be surprised if his guardian angel has the same ridiculous sense of humor he does. Maybe it knew the only way to get our attention was to rattle every window in our heads until we finally came running. I remembered this today out of nowhere, and honestly, it still makes my skin go cold when I think about it. My family has always been very Catholic, and during the early part of the pandemic, our parish started doing continuous adoration in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Families could sign up for an hour just to pray, reflect, or sit quietly in the chapel. My parents took the 3 to 4 p.m. slot, but a lot of the time, they would ask either my younger sister or me to go in their place. Sometimes, the two of us went together. That afternoon, we got ready like we usually did. I took my rosary and one of my mom's old prayer books, and before going to the church, we stopped at a small store to buy a candle and a box of matches. The church was close to our house, so we arrived just as our hour was starting. When we walked in, I noticed right away that the person before us had already left. My sister went over to write our names in the attendance log, and I stepped into the chapel. And that was when it began. All of a sudden, I felt this sharp, burning pain across my back. At first, I tried to brush it off. I lit the candle, made the sign of the cross, and sat down. But the pain kept getting stronger. It honestly felt like my skin was burning. After a few minutes, I couldn't ignore it anymore, so I leaned toward my sister and whispered, "Something's wrong. My back hurts really badly. Can you look?" I wasn't expecting her to find anything. I had taken a shower before we left, and there had been nothing there. No rash, no cuts, no marks. My sister lifted the back of my shirt, and her face changed immediately. She just stared. I said, "What? What is it?" She looked frightened. Then she said, "Your back is covered in scratches." I gave this nervous little laugh because I thought she had to be messing with me. I said, "Don't joke like that." But she shook her head and said, "I'm not joking." Then she went even quieter, and she whispered, "More are showing up." That's when I completely froze. I said, "What do you mean more are showing up?" She told me that thin red scratches were appearing across my back while she was looking at them. She said they hadn't been there seconds before. At that point, I was terrified. I could feel myself getting emotional, but we didn't want to leave the Blessed Sacrament unattended. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I started praying the rosary. My sister prayed the responses with me, and we stayed there for the whole hour. But the burning did not stop. Not once. When the next person finally came in for their shift, we finished the prayers and left as quickly as we could. By then, my back felt raw, like it was still on fire. The walk home felt much longer than it really was. As soon as we got inside, we told my parents everything. My mother checked my back herself and cleaned the scratches. To this day, I still don't have an explanation for what happened in that chapel. But I know this much. After that afternoon, my parents never sent me there by myself again. From then on, someone always went with me. And sometimes, when I think about that quiet chapel, that empty hour, and those scratches appearing out of nowhere, I still wonder what was really in there with us. I was pretty young when this happened. I'd say elementary school age, though I honestly couldn't tell you exactly how old I was. It's been too long. I just know I was old enough to understand that something strange had happened, but still young enough that the dark felt enormous. Back then, I had a lot of trouble at night. I had night terrors, the kind where I'd wake up screaming so loudly my family would talk about it the next day. I also sleepwalked. Not once or twice either. It happened enough that my parents would joke, sometimes not fully joking, that they might need to tie me to the bed just to keep me safe. I was that kid who would suddenly appear beside someone's bed in the middle of the night, just standing there. Of course, they'd wake up terrified, and then I'd wake up terrified too, because I had no idea how I'd gotten there or why someone was yelling. One winter, I sleepwalked through the sliding door and ended up on the enclosed porch. It wasn't heated, and I curled up out there and fell asleep. My mom found me in the morning, freezing cold. Another time, at my dad's house, I shared an upstairs room with my sister. My stepmom woke up to banging on the window and came in to find me trying to open it. She panicked and asked what I was doing because I could have fallen out. Apparently, I told her, very calmly, that I was just trying to get a drink of water from the kitchen. So yes, my family had reasons to worry. The thing is, I never remembered sleepwalking unless someone woke me up in the middle of it. And when that happened, I was confused, frightened, and hard to calm down. But this night was different. It was summer at my mom's house, which was my main home. I remember the season clearly because we didn't use the air conditioning until it got unbearably hot. Instead, we'd open the windows and turn on the attic fan. That fan had this strong, steady pull to it, like the whole house was breathing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard voices. No one should have been awake. My mom and stepdad were strict about bedtime, and once the lights were out, that meant everyone was done for the night. And that night, every light in the house was off. But I could hear talking. It was muffled, not clear enough to make out words, but definitely voices. Low, steady voices. At that age, I was terrified of getting out of bed at night. I'd hold my bladder until morning, no matter how badly I needed the bathroom, just because walking through the dark felt impossible. If I ever did get up, I would turn on the hall light immediately. But that night, I didn't. I just felt curious. The voices sounded close, almost like they were pulling my attention down the hallway. I got out of bed and walked toward them without even thinking about the light. At the end of the hallway, you could turn left into the dining room or right toward the front door. The attic fan was right above that spot, and when I reached it, I remember the air moving over my arms. It raised the hair on my skin, but not in a scary way. It actually felt good because the house was so warm. I stopped there and asked myself, "Am I dreaming?" And I decided I wasn't. I could feel the carpet under my feet. I could touch the wall beside me. I could feel the fan moving air across my skin. Everything felt solid and normal. Nothing had that strange, slippery feeling dreams sometimes have. Because it was summer, the front door was open, but the screen door was shut and locked. Sometimes my parents left the porch light on, probably to make the porch seem less inviting to anyone outside. So when I turned toward the door, I could see through it clearly. And that's when I realized the voices were coming from the porch. I still wasn't scared. That's the strangest part to me even now. I was a child who was scared of everything at night, but in that moment, I felt completely calm. I thought maybe my mom was outside talking to a neighbor, or maybe two neighbors were talking. Mostly, I remember feeling like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't included in, and I wanted to know what it was. So I walked closer. The voices got a little louder, still muffled, still impossible to understand, but they sounded like a calm conversation. I was sure that when I opened the door, I'd see someone sitting right there on the porch. I opened the screen door, and there, standing on the porch, were two small gray figures. They looked like what people would call aliens. Small bodies, gray skin, the whole thing. They weren't hiding. They didn't jump or run. It felt more like I had interrupted a conversation they already knew I was going to interrupt. We looked at each other for maybe 1 or 2 seconds. And then they were gone. I don't know if they vanished. I don't know if I blinked or looked away and then looked back. I only know that one moment they were there, and the next moment they weren't. And still, I felt calm, not frozen, not screaming, not panicked, just peaceful. I shut the screen door, turned around, and walked back down the hallway. I remember the attic fan touching my skin again as I passed under it, and I remember telling myself, once more, that I was awake. Then I got back into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I was sitting at the table while my mom made breakfast. She asked me how I slept, and all at once, the whole memory came rushing back. It didn't feel like remembering a dream. You know how sometimes you start telling someone about a dream, and halfway through, you realize parts of it don't make sense? This wasn't like that. It felt as real as remembering what I had done the day before. I said, "Mom, I don't think you're going to believe me, but I woke up last night, and there were aliens talking outside on the porch." I told her everything. The voices, the hallway, the fan, the screen door, the 2 gray figures. I was excited, honestly. I thought maybe she'd know what it meant, or at least help me understand why they had been there. But she just looked at me strangely. Then she told me, very carefully, that I must have had a realistic dream. I told her it wasn't a dream. I knew it wasn't. She said again that it had to be, and I remember feeling so disappointed. I don't blame her. I know how it sounded. But something about her brushing it off made me feel like I couldn't tell her things like that anymore. We never talked about it again, but I still remember it clearly. I'm almost 40 now, and it's still one of the sharpest memories from my childhood. I still think about it all the time and wonder what, exactly, I saw on that porch. I've told this story to a handful of people over the years, but I've always wanted to put it into words for someone who might understand it, or maybe someone who has experienced something close to it. So I'll start where it really began, sometime around 2020. Back then, I was living with my mom and my girlfriend, and I was near the end of my senior year of high school. It was the COVID year, so everything felt strange already. School got cut short, time blurred together, and honestly, my friends and I were smoking a lot back then, so some of the smaller details are a little foggy. My grandma had always been deeply into ghost stories, but not in a casual way. She genuinely believed there was something in her house. She called it a shadow man. She used to tell me it helped my blind grandpa find his chewing tobacco and things like that, almost like it was just another strange presence in the house. My uncle, though, had a very different feeling about it. He stayed there for a while after his house burned down, and he said he heard what sounded like children running up and down the hallway. He also claimed he heard voices, and even said he had recordings. At the time, I was young, and I didn't really believe much of it. Then my grandma had to go in for open-heart surgery. Several doctors had turned her down because the odds were so risky. I remember hearing she had around an 80% chance of making it, and even that felt terrifying. Eventually, some surgeons in St. Louis agreed to do it, so my grandparents went there and stayed for quite a while. My brother, who I'll call Zane, was already living at their place, so he stayed behind to take care of the house and the dogs. One day, my friend, who I'll call Devin, and I went out there to visit him. We brought a 12-pack of Diet Coke and a little weed, and the 3 of us sat in the back room, talking and smoking. My grandma's house was way out in the middle of nowhere. There were neighbors, technically, but they were spread far apart. It was the kind of place where silence had room to stretch. I don't remember what we were talking about exactly, but I remember what interrupted us. From the other end of the house, we heard yelling. Not normal yelling. It was muffled, but loud, and it sounded distressed. The words were all tangled together, like someone speaking through a wall in a language I couldn't recognize. It didn't sound human in the way you expect a voice to sound human. The house wasn't huge, maybe around 1,500 square feet, so it wasn't like the sound was far away. It felt close enough to make all three of us stop. After that, we started talking about the Shadow Man. I tried to convince myself the sound had come from outside, but deep down, I knew something about it felt wrong. Devin and I left later, and I tried not to think about it too much. But that night, when I got home, I was lying in bed with my girlfriend, and I heard the same sound again. The exact same garbled yelling. Only this time, it was in my own house, almost 45 minutes away from my grandma's. It was late, everything was quiet, and both of us heard it. That was the moment things stopped feeling like a weird story and started feeling like something had followed me. After that, life got strange for a few years. At first, it was small things, knocking at the door at 2 or 3 in the morning, but nobody would be there. It was always 3 knocks, every time. That detail still bothers me. One night, 2 friends of mine, who I'll call Cole and Wade, were in my room playing Clone Hero with me. We heard a knock at the door. I had already told Cole about the Shadow Man, but he didn't believe it. He laughed and said it had to be Devin messing with me. So he ran to check. Nobody was there. He still brings that up sometimes. There were voices too. Little "hey" and "hello" sounds right in your ear. Then there was the TV in the game room. Sometimes I'd hear it turn on by itself, play for a few minutes, and then shut off. I never got brave enough to fully investigate it. I couldn't tell if it was actually the TV or something pretending to be one. I could hear noise, but I could never make out exactly what was being said. One time, Devin was watching my webcam while we were talking online, and he told me he saw my girlfriend walk past in the background. But she wasn't home. She was at work. I knew that for a fact because I had just gone through her line at work, gotten food, and come straight back home. The thing that scared me the most in that house happened while I was home alone. I was sitting in the game room with the door open, playing CS:GO with Wade. The bedrooms had carpet, but the rest of the place had stained concrete floors. All of a sudden, from the far side of the house, I heard what sounded like someone in socks sliding quickly across the floor. Fast little movements, almost like a child running. It came closer and closer, all the way up to my doorway. Then it stopped. There was silence. And then, clear as day, right there in the doorway, I heard a human finger snap. That was the first time I remember shaking so badly I couldn't even explain what happened. Wade was still talking to me through the mic, and I just sat there frozen. After that, snapping became regular. That and the 3 knocks. Those were its calling cards. It got to where I couldn't sleep unless the TV was blaring loud enough to cover the sounds. My mom heard things too, but she handled it differently. She'd say, "We have to live here, so I just ignore it." One time, I was terrified, and she casually told me that just minutes earlier, someone on the couch had said hello to her, even though nobody was there. She just brushed it off. My mom is tougher than me. I ran out of that house more than once. Eventually, rent went up, and we decided to move. We bought an old single-wide trailer for cheap and put it on some property my mom had near my grandma's place. I really hoped we had left everything behind. We hadn't. The first night in that trailer, my girlfriend, who I'll call Eliza, and I were getting settled in. My brother Zane was there too, and my mom was over at my grandparents' house. Eliza and I were walking near the front door when the front and back doors swung open at the exact same time. Then all the breakers flipped. At the same moment, there was this awful moaning sound. I called my mom, scared out of my mind. I don't remember exactly what she said, but knowing her, it was probably something like, "Flip the breakers back on and ignore it." Honestly, that might have been the best advice anyone could give, even if it didn't make me feel better. In that trailer, things got worse. There was a sound that happened over and over at night, like someone dropping a marble on the floor in the back of the trailer. It would hit, bounce faster and faster, then stop. Then it would happen again. I never found a marble or anything that could explain it. The whispering got worse too. Mostly greeting words. Always soft, always close to my ear. For a while, I would wake up every morning around 4:30. I don't know if that meant something, but it happened enough that I noticed. I started looking for help and even contacted a few churches, but nothing ever really came of it. Devin stopped coming over much after things started getting thrown near him. When he did visit, he'd sometimes sleep in his car instead of inside. He told me about objects moving in the house and even in the shop building on the property. It also liked knocking on the window by my computer. I know there are more things I'm forgetting, which is part of why I wanted to finally write this down. That trailer was the worst period of it, and I'm honestly grateful my memory has softened some of it. The last truly terrifying thing happened years later, after my grandma passed away in the hospital. My mom had been staying with her and wanted to go home that night. I offered to stay with Zane and my grandpa at their house. Zane and I had gone out back to smoke in this little building they called the back house. Later, we came inside and stopped in the kitchen to get a drink. While we were standing there, knocks exploded through the house. Every wall, every ceiling, every surface. It sounded like 30 people knocking at the same time, and every knock came in threes. I cried. I can laugh about that now, but in the moment, it was horrible. There was still some activity after that, but nothing as intense. Over the next couple of years, it slowly faded. Now it's been about 3 years since anything has happened. Eliza and I live in a new place, and nothing has followed us here. I hope it stays that way. But I want to say clearly that this really happened. I know how it sounds. I know some people won't believe it. That's okay. I'm sharing it because it changed the way I think about things, and because a part of me is still curious. If anyone has experienced something similar, especially the 3 knocks, the snapping, or that strange garbled yelling, I'd honestly love to know. This whole thing left me with questions I think I'll carry for the rest of my life. I'm new here, so I hope it's okay if I share something that's been sitting in the back of my mind for a while. About 5 years ago, I started looking into EVP, electronic voice phenomena. At first, I thought it would just be strange recordings, faint whispers, little oddities you can explain away if you try hard enough. But the deeper I went, the more I felt like there were layers to this world that most of us never get told about. One theory that really caught my attention is sometimes called the UFO intrusion theory. The idea is that UFOs and ghosts may not be separate things at all. They could be the same phenomenon, beings from another dimension that have been close to us for thousands of years. And according to this theory, they are not physical in the way we are. They are more like energetic beings. Just like we need food from plants and animals to keep going, they might need energy from us. Not food exactly, but emotional and electrical energy. Brainwaves, fear, joy, awe, prayer, panic, euphoria. That's the part that made me think of Monsters, Inc. Not in a childish way, but in the sense that fear, emotion, and human intensity become a kind of fuel. The theory suggests these beings cross into our reality and appear in ways we can barely understand. Lights in the sky, strange shapes in rooms, cold spots, voices, knocks, shadows, orbs. They create fear, confusion, wonder, and sometimes even happiness, then somehow absorb the energy we produce in those moments. Think about a packed church, everyone praying with deep emotion, or a stadium full of people shouting, celebrating, almost vibrating together, or a concert where thousands of minds are locked into the same feeling. The theory says those moments might produce exactly the kind of energy these beings are drawn to. There are people who point to infrared photos as possible evidence. Beams, strange lights, or round glowing shapes near people's heads during religious gatherings, sports events, concerts, and other emotional crowds. Of course, some of these photos could have normal explanations: dust, reflections, camera artifacts. But once you start looking at enough of them, the pattern begins to feel harder to ignore. And then there's religion and folklore. Gods, saints, elves, genies, spirits, angels, demons. Maybe these were never entirely separate categories. Maybe they were different names, from different cultures, for the same visitors pressing their faces against the glass of our world. Even animals seem to notice something, cats especially. Anyone who lives with cats has probably seen it. They stare at empty corners, follow something invisible with their eyes, suddenly hiss at nothing. Sometimes they act like they are tracking a presence we simply cannot sense. In one case I studied, there was a house where a young girl and a teenage boy seemed to appear. We had a photograph and several EVP recordings. In the recordings, they seemed to suggest they had once lived there, that they had drowned, and even gave names. After some digging, the details seemed to place the story somewhere around the early 1960s. But under this theory, they may not have been ghost children at all. They may have been interdimensional beings using the memory of the house, like reaching into an old wound and making it speak. They could have accessed something traumatic that lingered there, then shaped it into voices, images, and emotions. Not necessarily to communicate with us, but to affect us, to unsettle us, to pull energy from our reactions. That idea sounds wild at first, I know it does. But the more I read, the more I listened, and the more I compared different cases, the less impossible it felt. Places with heavy histories seem to attract this kind of activity again and again, almost as though memory itself becomes a doorway. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't. Maybe some of this can be explained naturally. Maybe some of it can't. But I do think there's something here worth looking at with an open mind. So I wanted to ask, what do you think? Have you ever experienced something that made you wonder whether ghosts, UFOs, and old folklore might all be different masks worn by the same thing? Ever since I was little, I've had the feeling that something has been following me through life. I know that sounds strange. I don't really know how else to explain it. For a long time, it didn't feel evil. It was unsettling, yes, but not hateful. Not at first. When I was growing up, my sister and I lived in a house that already felt heavy. Our family situation was abusive, and there was so much fear and anger in that home that it almost felt baked into the walls. Strange things happened all the time. We saw shadow figures. We heard whispers when nobody was there. Sometimes we heard screams. And there was something else too, something that looked like my sister, almost like her, but not quite. It moved like her, stood like her, had her shape, but something about it was wrong in a way I could feel before I could explain. That's probably a whole other story on its own. The more my sister and I talked about what we were experiencing, the worse it seemed to get. Looking back now, I honestly wonder if whatever it was had been feeding off the fear and the pain in that house. There was plenty of both. Eventually, I moved out. I was only 17, and I ended up living alone in an old farmhouse outside of town. It was way down this rough dirt road, far from neighbors, far from everything. The house was in terrible condition and probably should have been condemned, but I was desperate to get out of the situation I was in. The deal was simple: no rent, just somewhere to sleep. At first, I told myself the house was just old. Old houses make noises. They settle. They creak. But then I started hearing footsteps moving through rooms when I knew I was alone. Things would go missing, especially my keys, and then I'd find them in places I absolutely never would have put them. One night, I finally stood in the middle of the house and spoke out loud. I said, "Hi, I'm sorry if I'm in your space, but I'm 17 and I'm just trying to get out of a bad situation. This is my home for now, so please leave me alone." And strangely enough, things settled down after that. For a little while, anyway. Not long after, I started dating someone, and they moved in quickly. That relationship turned abusive too, and once the atmosphere in the house changed, the activity started picking up again. But this time, it seemed to focus on him. He would get home from work before me, but then he started waiting outside in his car until I arrived. I hadn't told him much about anything I'd experienced, so when he finally admitted he didn't want to go inside alone, I knew something had scared him badly. He told me things were being thrown at him. We had these old woven baskets sitting on a shelf, and he said one had been hurled across the room. Doors were slamming. He heard his name being called from down the hallway in the middle of the night. He saw shadows. At first, I blamed the farmhouse. I thought maybe the place itself had something attached to it. But deep down, I also wondered if the violence and fear around me were calling something back. Eventually, I got out of that relationship and moved again. Years passed. I still had experiences during that time. Lights flickered or turned on by themselves. TVs switched on and off. Whispers followed me from place to place. But nothing compared to what started happening after I moved in with my current partner. We met in 2024, and I moved into his rental not long after. It was a renovated house from the 1940s, and for the first time in ages, things were quiet. Almost too quiet. I started to relax. I almost let myself believe that whatever had been around me was finally gone. Then one day, I went back to my old town to collect some moving boxes. While I was away, my partner sent me a message. He wrote, "I know this sounds insane, but I just saw a figure standing beside our bed. It was on your side." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him everything. It was still early in our relationship, and because nothing had been happening, I didn't see the point in frightening him with all of it. But when I came back a day or two later, everything started again. Doorknobs twisted and rattled in broad daylight, right in front of us. Footsteps stormed up and down the hallway, loud and angry. Doors opened on their own. Things moved from where we'd left them. I've always used sage in my homes, not only when something paranormal is happening, but whenever the energy feels off. So I did what I knew how to do. I cleansed the house. It didn't help. Soon, I started waking up with bruises I couldn't explain. I was tired constantly, drained in a way that sleep didn't fix. At night, something would tug my hair hard enough to wake me. Then one night, my partner and I fell asleep on the couch. I had this dream, but it didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt like I was seeing through someone else's eyes. I was looking into our bedroom, and there was a figure standing beside the bed again. It looked like the outline of a person, but the inside of it was filled with static, like the old fuzz on a television screen. It didn't speak out loud, but I heard it anyway. It said, "Come to bed. Come to bed now. I can't help you unless you come to bed." Then it turned and started walking toward the lounge room. Before it reached us, I woke up. I shook my partner awake and started crying. I couldn't explain why, but I told him we needed to go to bed right then. Not later, right then. And the strange thing is, after we did, I slept peacefully for the first time in ages. A few weeks later, we were preparing to move again. I was out in the backyard, pulling weeds from the garden beds, when I accidentally picked up a small stone. It had a name written on it, Sander, and beside it was a childlike drawing of a figure. I don't know why, but the moment I realized what I was holding, I felt sick, uneasy, watched. I put it back exactly where I'd found it. A few days later, we moved. The new place was quiet at first, but I'd learned by then that quiet didn't always mean peace. My partner works away for long stretches, so a lot of what happened in that house happened while I was alone. The bruising came back, only worse. I'd wake up with new marks almost every day. Some looked like fingers had grabbed me. I felt exhausted constantly. I had awful dreams nearly every night. There were voices from empty rooms, banging from parts of the house where nobody was, doors opening, sheets being pulled off me while I slept, my hair being yanked until I woke up. Then, about a year later, my partner and I bought a house together. I cleansed it right away, almost like a ritual. For a few months, things seemed okay. Then they weren't. Now my partner is home more often, and he's experienced it too. We've both seen shadow figures standing in dim rooms. The TV and PlayStation have turned on by themselves in the middle of the night, waking us up each time. Doors open, objects move. The same pattern repeats, only now it feels angrier. Recently, I fell asleep on the couch while my partner was watching TV. I woke slightly when he suddenly got up in a rush and went into the kitchen. I heard banging around in there, but I assumed it was him and drifted back off. Later, he woke me and asked, "Did you hear that?" I asked him what he meant. He told me the banging hadn't been him. He'd gotten up because he heard it too. He said the walls in the kitchen were being hit over and over again, and as soon as he found the courage to go look, it stopped. Our dog noticed it too. She doesn't bark or hide. She just stares in the direction of the noise and whimpers until we tell her it's okay. Lately, the dreams have started again. I keep waking up in the middle of the night already crying. Sometimes nothing specific wakes me, but I open my eyes with tears on my face and this horrible feeling that something is near me, watching me, draining me. I wake my partner now when it happens, but even then, the feeling doesn't always leave. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it feels like this thing hates me, like I've offended it somehow, like it's followed me all this time and has only become more angry. There's something else I think about often. I used to work as a carer for an elderly man. I barely spoke to his wife beyond polite hellos and goodbyes. But one day, as I was leaving, she stopped me and said, "Can you feel it with you?" I laughed it off because I didn't know what else to do, but inside, I knew exactly what she meant. She asked if I believed in spirits. I told her I did. Then she asked if I knew something was attached to me. I said yes. She told me it wasn't human. She said it wasn't exactly evil, but it was draining me. When I asked how she knew, she just said, "I see it with you every time you come here." I asked if she could help me. She said she didn't know how. So now I don't know what to do. I've tried cleansing, I've tried crystals, I've tried protection spells, I've tried ignoring it, I've tried talking to it. I'm tired. I'm tired of being afraid in my own home. I'm tired of waking up bruised, exhausted, and crying without knowing why. I don't know what kind of spirit this is, or if spirit is even the right word. I don't know if anyone else has experienced something like this, but I know I can't keep pretending it will eventually leave on its own, because it hasn't. And I'm scared that if I don't find real help, it never will. Listen, I still don't know how to explain what happened that night. It was sometime in the middle of December, the kind of night where the cold doesn't just sit outside, it follows you around. My friend Ervin and I were driving back home after a long shift at work. We were tired, half silent, and the road ahead looked endless. There were no streetlights for a long stretch, nothing around us except darkness, fields, and the sound of the engine. The headlights were the only thing cutting through the road. I remember looking at the dashboard clock. It was 12:47 a.m. Arvin was trying to keep me awake by talking about old school memories. I had the radio on low, playing some old songs, but honestly, both of us were barely holding on. Then, as we turned around a bend, we saw him. An old man. He was standing by the side of the highway, completely alone. He wore an old, faded dhoti and a dark shawl wrapped around his shoulders. His hair was gray and messy, falling near his face. But the strange thing was, he wasn't panicking. He wasn't waving desperately or calling out for help. He was just standing there, waiting. As we got closer, he slowly raised one hand. I looked at Arvin and asked, "Should we stop?" He stayed quiet for a second, then said, "There's nobody else on this road. Poor man. Let's at least ask him." So I pulled over. The old man opened the back door and got inside. The moment he entered the car, I felt the air change. I'm not saying this to make it sound dramatic. It genuinely felt colder. And there was this smell too, like wet soil, old cloth, and burnt incense. I looked at him through the mirror and said, "Where do you need to go, Tata?" He didn't answer. His head was lowered. I couldn't see his eyes properly. I thought maybe he was too tired to speak, so I started driving again. 5 minutes passed. Then 10, then maybe 20. He didn't say a word, not even a cough, not even a small movement. Every now and then, I checked the rearview mirror. He was sitting in the exact same position, completely still. The silence in the car became heavier and heavier. Finally, Arvin turned around and asked, "Tata, which village are you from?" Still nothing. No reply. No movement. That was when I started feeling something was wrong. Soon we reached the border of our village. The Eli Coville was just ahead, near the old archway. I don't know why, but I felt relieved when I saw the temple. I stopped the car near it, kept the engine running, and turned around. I said, "Tata, we've reached the village. Where exactly do you want to get down?" And then I froze. The back seat was empty. Completely empty. For a few seconds, my mind couldn't understand what I was seeing. The door hadn't opened. We hadn't stopped anywhere. There was no sound, no movement, no chance for him to get out. But he was gone. I looked at Arvin. He was staring at the empty seat with his face drained of color. He whispered, "Where did he go?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Without thinking, I got out of the car and ran straight into the temple. I went inside, fell before the deity, and started praying. Arvin came in a little later. He tried to act normal. He even gave a nervous laugh and said, "Maybe we imagined it. We were tired. We had a little drink too, remember?" I looked at him and said, "How can both of us imagine the same old man?" He had no answer. We stayed there for nearly half an hour before leaving. I dropped Arvin at his house, then drove home. Nothing else happened on the way. By the time I reached home, I was trying hard to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe the old man got out quietly when we weren't looking. Maybe we were too tired. Maybe fear made everything feel bigger than it was. I took a bath, changed my clothes, and tried to sleep. Just then, my phone rang. It was Arvin's father. He was crying. He said, "Please come quickly. Something is wrong with Arvin." My stomach tightened. I rushed to his house. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was terribly wrong. Arvin was sitting on the floor. His eyes were rolled upward and his whole body was shaking. His family members were trying to hold him down. When he saw me, he smiled. But it wasn't his smile. It was cold, cruel, wrong. Then he spoke, and the voice that came out of him was not Arvin's. It was deep, rough, and old. He said, "Where is Ramanathan?" Everyone went silent. Arvin didn't know anyone named Ramanathan. His family didn't either. But he kept repeating it. "Where is Ramanathan? Where is Ramanathan?" Again and again. That voice sounded exactly like an old man's voice, and all I could think about was the man we had picked up on the highway. Arvin's mother was crying. His father was calling relatives. Nobody knew what to do. Then an elderly neighbor said, "Take him to the Eli Kovil, now!" So we carried him there. The priest was already awake, preparing for the early morning puja. The moment he saw Arvin, his face changed. He told everyone to stand back. He began chanting. He placed sacred ash on Arvin's forehead. At first, nothing happened. Then Arvin screamed. It echoed through the whole temple compound. The lamps near the shrine flickered hard, even though there was no wind inside. The priest kept chanting. Arvin started laughing. Not like himself. It was a horrible, broken laugh. Then he said, "The road." His voice dragged through the air. "The road belongs to me." The priest threw holy water on him. Arvin's body jerked backward. He let out one final scream, and I swear it sounded exactly like the old man from the car. Then everything went silent. Arvin collapsed. For a few minutes, nobody moved. Then slowly, he opened his eyes. He looked weak, confused, normal. He asked, "Why is everyone here?" He remembered nothing after I dropped him at his house. Nothing at all. Later, the priest told us something that still stays with me. Many years ago, an old man named Ramanathan had died on that same highway on a cold night. A speeding truck had hit him, and his body had remained unidentified for days. After that, people sometimes said they saw an old man standing near that stretch of road, asking for a ride. Most people called it a rumor. I wish it had stayed that way. Arvin recovered after a few days, and slowly, life went back to normal. But even now, whenever I drive past that road after midnight, I don't look toward the side of the highway. Because sometimes, just for a second, I feel like I can see him there. An old man standing in the dark, quiet, patient, waiting for someone kind enough to stop. And if he ever raises his hand again, I won't. I'd only been living in that house for about 2 years when my parents separated. After that, the house was sold, and my mom, my little brother Jame, and I moved into a rented place just down the same street we used to live on. And honestly, the house itself was lovely. It had the same kind of layout and feeling as the home we'd grown up in, so in a strange way, it felt familiar. Safe, even. I have to give my mom a lot of credit for that. She did everything she could to make the divorce feel less painful for me and my younger brother. She kept things steady. She made the house feel warm. She made sure we still had some kind of normal. But even with all that, There was always something about that place that felt off. Our old house had backed onto other gardens, other families, normal street life. This one was on the opposite side of the road, and the garden backed onto a steep wooded railway embankment. Beyond that were the old tracks, then open fields. During the day, it was beautiful, green, quiet, peaceful. But at night, it felt completely different. It felt like the darkness had somewhere to hide. One weekend night, it was around 1 in the morning, and I went into the kitchen to get a drink. My mom and I both had a habit of staying up late, especially on weekends, and she would usually drift off in front of the television. So I made my drink, took it back into the living room, then went back into the kitchen to switch the light off. I turned it off, stepped out, and pulled the door shut behind me. And the second the door clicked closed, I heard a voice. It was my little brother. Clear as anything, from inside the kitchen, he said, "I'm in here." And it sounded so normal. That's what still bothers me. It didn't sound dramatic or frightening. It sounded exactly like he had wandered into the kitchen without me noticing, and I'd accidentally shut him in the dark. So without thinking, I said, "Sorry," and opened the door again. I flicked the light back on. There was nobody there. The kitchen was empty. Jame was upstairs in bed, fast asleep. Now, this next part might have been a coincidence. I've always tried to be fair about that. My mom had a habit of stacking too many plates on the draining board, and sometimes they would slip for no real reason. But at that exact moment, the plates shifted. A few of them slid, clattered, and some dropped down. That sound didn't scare me much. It had happened before. It was loud, but it was ordinary. What scared me was the voice. My brother's voice, saying something completely normal. "I'm in here." When he wasn't, and that's the part I've never been able to shake. I've spent years asking myself what I actually heard that night. Why would I hear my brother say such an everyday thing when he was nowhere near the kitchen? That, to me, is what made it so disturbing. It wasn't some figure standing in the corner of my room. It wasn't a shadow moving across the hallway. It was something pretending to be part of a normal moment. Something small, familiar, harmless. And somehow that made it worse. I know what I heard. I didn't mistake the television for his voice. He didn't sneak downstairs to scare me. He was asleep. The kitchen was empty. But something spoke from inside that room, and it used my brother's voice. We moved out of that house in early 2020. I still pass it sometimes, and I do think of it as a happy home in many ways. It gave us a little piece of normal life when everything else had been pulled apart. But no matter how warm that house felt in the daylight, I'll always remember what happened there that night. And I'll always wonder what was waiting behind that kitchen door.